Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. Story 1. I was never supposed to talk about this, and maybe I shouldn't, but silence has only made it worse. Louder in my head, more real at night when everything else is still. My name is Josh, and my sister Megan vanished in July of 2018 after visiting a so-called spiritual retreat in the forested backwoods of Oregon near the Cascades. She was 26 years old, smart, skeptical, the type who'd read Reddit threads about cults and say she'd never fall for that crap. But she did, and I think she's still there. I've told the police, private investigators, even local journalists, but no one believes me anymore. They say she left on her own. But I've seen things, heard things. I've gone out there myself. I've got photos, voice recordings, and a journal I found hidden inside the walls of a half-collapsed farmhouse. Scrawled in handwriting I'd swear belongs to her. If you're watching this, or listening to it, or reading it somewhere, I'm not trying to convince you to believe me. I just need to say it. I just need someone to hear the whole story in case I disappear next. Because that's how it works with them. They let you get close, just close enough to see the edge of their rotten little utopia, and then they either let you in or make sure you never speak again. Started with a phone call in late June. Megan had always been into yoga, meditation, crystals, not super hardcore or anything, just the typical West Coast wellness stuff. She called me one night, voice buzzing with excitement, telling me she'd signed up for something called the Renewal. I laughed, thinking it was some spa weekend or a detox thing, but she corrected me. It was a retreat, yes, but with a spiritual focus. A commune in the forest, self-sustaining, off-grid, no phones, no internet. A pure reset. She sounded like she'd just done a line of something manic, floaty, like she wasn't entirely grounded. I asked where it was, and she hesitated. Somewhere near Bright Hollow, she finally said, and I remember the name because it sounded like something out of a horror novel. I looked it up while she talked. Google Maps didn't show much. Just a stretch of logging roads, no real town, barely a couple markers. It's only a week, she said. I need this. You don't know what it's like in my head lately. And that was true. Megan had struggled with depression and anxiety for years, ever since our parents died in that fire. She was always looking for meaning. I told her to be careful. She promised to text when she got back. That was the last time I ever heard her voice. A week passed, then two. I told myself she'd just stayed longer, lost track of time, maybe found peace. But by the third week with no word, I drove to her apartment in Portland. It was locked, mail stacked at the door, plants dying on the sill. I called the police, but they shrugged it off, said adults can go off the grid if they want. No signs of foul play. She'll turn up, they said. But something in me twisted, deep and primal, the way you just know when something is wrong. I started digging. I went through her emails, broke into her laptop, found the confirmation for the retreat. It wasn't called the Renewal officially. It was under something more obscure, the Church of the Last Light. A 501c3, with a handful of vague documents and tax records registered to an address in Lane County. The website was bare bones. One image of a dawn-lit meadow, a single quote, "Death is not the end, but a door to unity," and a button labeled "Apply for Passage." No names, no contact. I followed the trail to a woman named Gloria Mendel, listed as the spiritual director in an old PDF buried in the site's back end. I Googled her and found almost nothing. One blurry photo, a couple interviews from the 90s where she talked about energetic harmonics and post-urban soul rewilding. Sounded like bullshit, but people loved her. Like they'd been brainwashed. Like they saw her as a prophet. I called every number tied to the address. Most were disconnected. One finally picked up, a man with a calm, almost robotic voice who said only, "The last light is not accepting visitors. All who seek unity must walk the path alone." Then he hung up. That's when I drove out to Bright Hollow myself. I had to see it. I packed light but brought a GoPro, 2 disposable phones, and a handgun I wasn't even legally allowed to carry. It was 4 hours of winding roads through damp forest, then gravel, then dirt. GPS lost signal an hour in. There were no signs, just trees pressing in like they were trying to choke the road. Then the forest broke into a clearing and I saw it. The commune. Dozens of cabins arranged in a circle, a large greenhouse in the center, and a strange wooden structure that looked like a giant eye made of bones and driftwood. The people were quiet. All wore white. No one spoke. They moved like dancers or sleepwalkers, smiling without blinking, skin almost too pale. I stayed back, hidden in the trees, watching with binoculars. I saw someone I swear was Megan, but her hair was bleached, her face thinner, her movements unnatural. She stared straight ahead like she wasn't inside her own body. I whispered her name. She didn't even flinch. That night, I slept in the car, terrified. I woke up to singing soft, harmonic, inhumanly perfect, like a choir of ghosts humming under the earth. And in the morning, they were all gone. The commune was empty. No people, no sounds, just fog hanging over the clearing. But their footprints were still there. And in the center of the structure, at the base of the bone eye, was a new object. A single blood-stained robe. And on it, stitched into the hem in red thread, was my sister's name. I didn't move for a long time after I saw her name. I just stood there, wind slicing through the trees, the blood on the robe drying into a rust-colored crust beneath the pale morning sun. The commune was silent, eerily so. I mean, completely devoid of noise. No insects, no birds, just that awful quiet, like the place had exhaled everything alive. I told myself it couldn't be hers. The robe, the name, it had to be a trick, a way to scare people off. Maybe they wanted to look threatening to outsiders. Maybe they were trying to make it seem like she'd moved on or whatever sick philosophy they followed. But that voice in the back of my mind, the one that speaks when dreams become bad and the shadows in your room stop feeling like furniture, kept whispering the same thing over and over. You're already too late. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to stay out in the open either. I stuffed the robe into my backpack, snapped photos of the altar and surrounding area, and took the narrow footpath that curved into the forest behind the greenhouse. It was less a path and more a clearing where the underbrush had been carefully trampled. There were symbols carved into some of the trees along the way, strange runes that looked like a blend of Norse, Celtic, and something else, something older. I followed them for over an hour until I reached a crumbling two-story farmhouse deeper in the woods. It didn't match the rest of the commune's aesthetic. This place was ancient, colonial style, warped wooden slats rotting off the frame, windows boarded up but sloppily so. Vines choked the porch. Something about it felt forgotten, like it had been erased from their little utopia, which meant it might hold something real. I pried open the front door, and the stench hit me immediately. Mold, mildew, and something sour underneath, like spoiled meat masked with incense. The floorboards moaned under my feet. Every step felt like I was intruding, not just in space, but in memory. Dust coated everything. I searched the house for hours, finding nothing but discarded furniture, warped books, broken jars, and piles of clothing that looked disturbingly recent. Then I reached the back bedroom upstairs. That's where I found the journal. It was hidden inside the wall, behind a loose panel near the head of a decaying mattress. Bound in leather, worn with age, and filled with writing I recognized instantly. Megan's. Her handwriting had always had this specific slope to it, and she dotted her eyes like little ticks. I opened it with shaking hands. The entries weren't dated, but they spanned dozens of pages. They started off normal, descriptions of the people she met at the commune, the rituals, the detox process. "They're gentle here," she wrote. "Kind, but serious. They say the world outside is dying, poisoned by noise, and only the last light remains clean." She described the food vegan, raw, tasteless. The cleansings where they fasted for days, sat in freezing mud baths, drank bitter tea that made her vomit. But it changed. Entry by entry, her writing grew more fragmented. Paranoid. Pages began to include little drawings, eyes, spirals, people with melting faces. "There's something in the woods," she wrote. "It watches at night. They pretend not to see it, but they know it's there. The light doesn't chase it away. It feeds it. She spoke about a ritual called the unveiling, a ceremony where certain followers were chosen to shed their forms and join the root. I didn't understand any of it until I hit the final page she wrote. It was smeared with dirt, ink running from moisture, but the message was clear. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry. I tried to stay awake. I really did, but the tea made me forget my name. The song pulls you under. Don't let them sing to you. Don't drink anything. And whatever you do, don't go into the root chamber. That's where she lives. She's not God. She's not light. She's the thing that crawled out when the world blinked. I dropped the journal. My stomach turned over, a deep, sour churn of horror. What the hell had she gotten into? I took the journal, stuffed it next to the robe, and started to leave. But as I turned back toward the stairs, I heard a sound from the first floor. Not footsteps, rustling, like movement in cloth. Slow and deliberate. I froze. My gun was buried deep in the backpack, and I wasn't about to make noise digging for it. I held my breath. The sound stopped. Then something knocked on the wall beneath me. Not the door. The wall. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Then a voice. My sister's voice, Megan's voice, called out, "Josh!" My blood turned to ice. I hadn't said my name since arriving. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. But the voice sounded exactly like her. Same tone, same lilt. Just wrong. Like it had been rehearsed. I didn't answer. I turned and ran down the hall, out the door, through the woods, back toward the clearing. The sun was already dipping below the trees, and the fog had returned, thicker this time. I got back to my car, heart pounding, fingers shaking as I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine stuttered. Once, twice, dead. I slammed my fists against the wheel, screaming. My phone had no signal. The disposable was dead. My GoPro battery had drained itself despite being full that morning. Everything was failing at once, like the forest itself didn't want me to leave. Then the singing started again, closer this time, surrounding the car. Dozens of voices, perfectly harmonized, humming a low, droning melody that wormed into my skull and made my teeth ache, covered my ears. It didn't help. And then, out of the fog, I saw them, figures in white robes, surrounding the clearing, faces hidden beneath bone masks. In their center stood a tall woman, 6.5 feet at least, wearing a robe stitched entirely from hair. Black, brown, red, blonde, woven together like some grotesque quilt. She raised her hand, and the song stopped. I turned the key one more time. The engine sputtered, caught. I floored it, drove through the gap between 2 robed figures who didn't move. My bumper clipped one. I didn't care. I just drove, branches whipping the windshield, gravel spitting from the tires, headlights flickering as the forest blurred past. I didn't stop until I hit paved road again and saw the first gas station in 40 miles. When I got home, I tried to file another report. Brought the journal, the photos. No one listened. They said the journal was faked, the robe inconclusive, the commune unverified. They treated me like I was grieving and lashing out. One detective even asked if I might have had something to do with Megan's disappearance. The thing is, I haven't gone back. Not yet. But I keep hearing that voice. In dreams. In static. Sometimes on random voicemails that come from no number at all. Josh, it always says, "You left me behind." And now I think she's getting closer. The voicemails didn't stop. They came at random hours, 2:17 a.m., 3:03, sometimes right when I was waking up, like they'd been waiting just outside the barrier of sleep. Always from unknown, always about 30 seconds long, and always starting with her voice. Not panicked, not scared, calm. That made it worse. It sounded like Megan was reciting something. Not talking to me, but like she was reading a prayer or a script. The roots are shallow for the unworthy. Come deeper. Come where the bark splits and the red leaks. We are waiting, Josh. We never stopped. Every time, it ended the same way. White noise, then a faint sound I could never place, like teeth clicking underwater or someone dragging fingernails across wet glass. I saved all of them, played them for the police, my ex, even a local paranormal podcast. But whenever I hit play in front of someone else, all that came through was static. Just static. Not even my voice responding. Just 30 seconds of silence and white hiss. I stopped trying to convince people. Instead, I started collecting everything I could. The robe, the journal, screen grabs of every broken URL tied to the Church of the Last Light. Even the GoPro footage, which had mostly corrupted except for one 10-second clip. It showed my face, terrified, lit only by the dim interior of the farmhouse. I was whispering something, hard to hear over the ambient noise, but if you turned the volume all the way up, you could make out 4 words. She's inside the walls. I don't remember saying it, but I don't doubt I did. Over the next year, things got worse. I started seeing her. Not in the real way, more like in glimpses, peripheral flashes. I'd pass a mirror and swear her reflection blinked before mine. I'd see her face in crowds, just long enough to turn my stomach inside out. It wasn't just hallucinations. Things moved in my apartment. Lights clicked on in rooms I hadn't entered. My cat, Milo, would stare at the closet for hours, growling low and slow. Then he vanished. No blood, no mess, just a clump of white fur by the front door and long parallel scratch marks along the walls, like something had dragged itself out. I moved, twice. It followed. Or maybe it was already inside me. I started dreaming of the commune. Not how it was, but how it must be now. Overgrown, swallowed by moss and rot and some kind of creeping fungal bloom that pulsed in the moonlight. In these dreams, I'd walk barefoot across the clearing, pulled toward the bone eye. The altar would split open, and stairs would descend into the earth. Megan was always at the bottom, hair down to her hips, eyes milky white, smiling with all her teeth. "You came back wrong," she'd whisper, "but you can be fixed." I'd always wake up screaming, cold sweat, nosebleeds. Once I woke with a handful of dirt clutched in my fist. I hadn't left my apartment. All the doors were still locked. That's when I decided I had to go back. I knew it was suicide. I'd seen enough horror movies, read enough Reddit threads to know you don't go back to the place that nearly killed you. But she wasn't gone. She wasn't a memory. She was active, a signal, like she was transmitting from inside that nightmare in the woods, and I was the only receiver still tuned in. I bought better gear this time, thermal camera, night vision, satellite phone, and another handgun. I left a letter with a friend, just in case. Told him not to come looking if I didn't return. Told him to burn everything. It was October when I went back. The forest felt even more alien, like the trees had grown closer together. It took longer to reach the clearing this time, almost 12 hours instead of 4, because the roads had changed. No GPS, no signage, just instinct. But eventually I found it again. The commune was still there, but now the buildings were half swallowed by vines, windows blacked out, roofs sagging like they'd been weeping in the rain. The altar was still in the center, but now it looked alive, covered in moss that pulsed slightly in the cold air, like it was breathing. I didn't see anyone, not at first, but I felt them, watching, always watching. I stepped into the greenhouse, and that's when I saw the photos. Hundreds of them pinned along the interior walls. Faces of people, all smiling, all wearing white. Some were modern. Some looked like they were from the 1960s. Others looked ancient, faded, curling at the edges, faces blurred by time. But every photo had a name written underneath it. And near the center wall, I found hers. Megan Taylor, smiling, eyes empty. Dated 7th passage, year of the hollow root. I don't know what that meant. There was no calendar to cross-reference. But underneath her photo, there was another me, taken from behind, dated the day I fled the commune the first time. First echo, that's all it said. I ripped the photo down, took a deep breath, and then the singing started again. But this time it was one voice, hers, soft, right behind me. "Come see the root." I turned, flashlight shaking. No one there, but the greenhouse doors had closed. I kicked them open and ran straight to the farmhouse. The door was ajar this time, waiting. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, breathing. The walls looked like skin. I know how that sounds. but it's the only way I can describe it. They glistened, like the wood had been replaced with something organic. I made my way to the upstairs bedroom, heart pounding. The journal was gone, but on the floor, in a perfect circle, were dozens of teeth. Human, clean, arranged like runes. And in the center was a hand mirror, cracked, but not broken. I picked it up, looked into it. Megan stared back. She was inside it, not a reflection, inside it, smiling with something wrong in her eyes. "Come see," she mouthed, and behind her I saw stairs, the root chamber, the place she warned me about. Before I could react, the floor beneath me cracked. A hatch opened. Stairs spiraled downward into darkness. And from below, the stench rose, earth, blood, and something primordial, something wet. I had come too far to stop, so I descended. Each step made the walls vibrate, like the house itself was moaning. My flashlight flickered. I reached the bottom and entered a chamber carved from stone and clay, filled with roots, thousands of them, snaking along the walls, pulsing with veins and movement. At the far end was something massive, something ancient. A tree, but not. Twisted, black, hollow at the center. And inside that hollow was Megan, naked, pale, eyes white and bleeding, her limbs tangled in the roots like a spider waiting in its web. She opened her mouth, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. "You should not have returned," it said. "She was promised to the root, and now you are too." I couldn't move. I know people say that in stories all the time, but I mean it in the truest sense. My muscles simply refused to respond, as if the command to flee had been intercepted by something deeper, something primal that knew it was already too late. The thing that used my sister's body, or what remained of it, cocked its head in a way that was both childlike and insectal, as if trying to figure out if I was food or family. The roots curled tighter around her form, some disappearing into her skin like veins, others wrapped around her limbs like strings on a puppet. Her jaw hung open wider than a human's should. No teeth, just darkness inside. She whispered again in that voice, if it was a voice, because it didn't enter my ears so much as it bypassed them, threading straight into the folds of my brain like a drill. "The root knows your name." I felt a warm liquid run down my neck and realized I was bleeding from my nose again. The chamber itself seemed to pulse with the words, every root twitching slightly, like it was a single living organism reacting to sound. I finally took a step back, then another, fumbling in the darkness, but the light from my flashlight was dimming. Not flickering, just dimming like the batteries were being drained by the air itself. I turned to run up the stairs, if they were even still behind me, and slammed full body into something soft and wet. Not wood, not stone, flesh. Something had grown across the stairwell behind me, sealing it off with a living membrane that quivered under my touch. It was warm, beating. I gagged. Behind me, the thing laughed. No, not laughed. It exhaled, and the roots hissed with moisture, spraying spores into the air that shimmered like gold dust in my dimming light. I held my breath and shoved the mirror, the one I'd picked up from the bedroom, into the thing sealing the stairwell. It shrieked, not audibly, but inside my skull, like an air horn went off behind my eyes. The mirror cracked further, but the wall peeled open just enough to squeeze through. I didn't look back. I didn't care what happened to Megan. I just wanted out. I burst into the farmhouse and ran into the woods, gasping, clawing through the fog. I ran for hours. It should have been a straight shot to my car. But the forest, it changed. The trail forked where it hadn't before. Trees leaned at impossible angles. I passed the same crooked stump 3 times before I realized I was going in circles. The forest was looping, like the commune didn't want me to leave this time. That's when I heard the footsteps. Multiple sets, circling, never too close, just loud enough to keep my adrenaline spiked. I ducked under a fallen log, waited. Silence. Then, that same soft voice, just behind me. "Josh!" "She's waiting." I spun around. Nothing, but the dirt beneath the log was stirred, scraped by fingernails, not claws. Human, fresh. That's when I realized I wasn't hallucinating. Someone had been under that log before me, hiding, running, from the same thing. I clawed through the underbrush until I saw a faint glow. Taillights. My car. Still there, buried in fog. I ran, hands shaking as I dug out the keys. When I turned the ignition this time, it worked on the first try. No interference. No flicker. Like the forest let me go. Like it wanted me to carry something out. I drove all night, not stopping until I hit a Denny's off the interstate. Dirty, shaking, still covered in root dust. I tried to tell myself it had been mold, fungus-induced hallucinations. But the mirror, I still had it. And even in the greasy bathroom light of a cheap diner, it showed things that weren't real. My reflection was fine, but in the corners behind me, I kept seeing her. Standing just out of frame, always a little closer each time. I threw it in the dumpster that night. It was back on my motel nightstand the next morning. And that was when I accepted something I'd been denying for months. I never really left that place. The commune. It grafted itself onto me, or I'd been seeded or marked, or whatever term you want to use. I started getting letters. Handwritten, no return address. Always in red ink. "She's nearly complete," one said. "Bring the root what it needs." Another came with a lock of hair, hers. I ran a DNA test through a friend in a lab. 99% match. Megan. Still alive. Somehow. Somewhere. I tried to forget. Tried to move on. But my nose kept bleeding. My cat never came back. And sometimes at night, I'd wake up outside, just standing barefoot in the middle of the street, hands full of dirt and old bone fragments, humming that damn song. I tried therapy. They thought I was schizophrenic. Prescribed antipsychotics. Didn't help. I stopped going. Started isolating. The calls returned. No voice anymore. Just static. But when I played the static in reverse, it wasn't random. It was the same sentence repeated over and over, buried in white noise. The soil remembers. I didn't sleep after that. Barely ate. My fingernails turned gray. My gums bled. I started vomiting moss. Moss. I swear to God. I filmed it. Took it to urgent care. The sample evaporated during testing. They told me to get rest. I bought a shotgun. I started setting alarms around the apartment, motion sensors, timers, cameras. Every few nights, they'd all go off at once. But no footage. Just static. My building got condemned last month. They said the roots from nearby trees had started to grow through the basement foundation, cracking concrete, warping walls. But I know better. I feel them down there, listening, waiting. The church never needed followers. It needed fertilizer. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I know how I sound. I'm telling you because it's spreading. I've tracked the patterns. Missing persons reports within 100 miles of Bright Hollow have tripled in the last year. Bodies found in the woods with no fingerprints, teeth removed, organs replaced with dirt. Dirt. That's what they become. That's what she became. And if I don't do something, I'll be next. Or worse, I'll be another seed. Another whisper in the dark for someone else to follow. So I've made a choice. I'm going back one last time. Fully armed. Cameras everywhere. I've rigged my body with a dead man's switch. If my heart stops, my GPS and all my evidence gets uploaded to multiple secure locations. If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it out. And if I didn't make it out, don't come looking. Let the roots starve. Burn the forest. Salt the earth. And for God's sake, don't follow the singing. I left at dawn, driving toward the rising sun like a soldier heading to his own burial. The roads felt longer this time, like they'd stretched while I was away, or like the earth itself was subtly shifting to make the journey more grueling. I hadn't slept in days, but I was wired, pulse thumping through my temples like war drums. I wasn't coming to investigate anymore. I was coming to end it. I'd wired the shotgun with a backup trigger, carried a thermite charge, enough to melt through roots, walls, whatever this organism really was. I wore a hazmat suit. Overkill? Maybe. But the first time I'd underestimated them. This time I planned to salt the earth. My car's trunk was packed with kerosene, magnesium flares, and enough accelerant to torch an entire clearing. I didn't care if I died out there. Honestly, part of me hoped I would. But if I did, I'd make sure they burned with me. I reached the forest line around 7:12 a.m., parked the car, and hiked in on foot. I'd memorized every turn, every unnatural bend of tree limb, every half-faded marker I'd scratched into bark on my last trip. But none of them were there. Every trail I recognized was gone, overgrown by impossible foliage that hadn't been there months ago. Some of the trees had twisted together overhead, nodding into arches like vertebrae. Others oozed sap that smelled like rotting fruit. I knew I was being watched, knew that it remembered me. The birds didn't sing. The wind didn't blow. The air felt heavy, thick with moisture and spores. After 5 hours of pushing through brush that fought me like living bramble, I found the clearing again. But it wasn't empty anymore. Dozens of people stood in perfect silence. Robes white, skin pale as candle wax, eyes open wide like they'd been sewn that way. No blinking, no breathing, just watching. In the center stood the eye again, but now it had grown. Twice the size, crawling with vines and bark and bone. Skulls nestled among the branches, some human, some not. It throbbed like a cyst. The greenhouse had collapsed inward, its frame twisted into a spiral pointing toward the ground like a drain. They dug deeper. The farmhouse still stood, but now its walls pulsed and moaned quietly, exhaling breath that clouded in the cold air. The people didn't stop me as I approached. They parted, silently, like trees shifting in a breeze I couldn't feel. I held the shotgun tight, barrel loaded, trigger half-pressed. If anyone moved toward me, I'd start firing. But they didn't. One of them, an old man with milky eyes, stepped forward and held out something wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it carefully. It was Megan's old necklace, the one she wore every day since she was 15. A little moonstone pendant on a frayed leather cord. "She wears it still," the old man said, voice dry and hollow. "But she has no need for symbols now. The root has crowned her." My vision tunneled. I aimed the gun at his chest, finger trembling. "Where is she?" I asked. "Where's my sister?" He smiled, no malice, just pity. "She is here. She is everywhere. The root drinks and she blooms." I pulled the trigger. The blast knocked him flat. The others didn't flinch. No one screamed. No one moved. Blood pooled under his robe. I chambered the next round and moved forward. Still, no one stopped me. It was like they wanted me to go in. As I stepped into the farmhouse, the temperature dropped instantly. My breath crystallized. The interior was no longer decayed, it was preserved, but wrong. The walls were slick with something between sap and mucus. The photos were back, hundreds of them like in the greenhouse, but these were moving. Faces shifted, blinked, breathed. Megan's face in each one, her smile growing wider, her eyes dimming with each frame. Her voice echoed faintly, speaking to no one. "The roots are shallow. Dig deeper." I pushed toward the basement door, now sealed with a fleshy membrane like a scab. I poured kerosene on it and lit a flare. The fire caught instantly, the door peeling back like burning skin. The smoke didn't rise. It curled downward, sucked into the black like gravity had flipped. I descended into the root chamber for the last time. This time, it wasn't just roots. It was an entire biome. A hollow cavern filled with wet growth, fungal bulbs pulsing with pale light, tendrils coiling around massive clusters of bone and cloth and skin. And at the center was her, Megan, suspended in the air, completely nude, but not exposed. Her body covered in a thin membrane that pulsed with each breath she took. Her limbs were wrong, longer, fingers splayed like spider legs. Her mouth opened in slow motion, a smile stretching far beyond what a human face should allow. Her eyes met mine, and I knew she saw me. For a moment, I believed she was still in there. For a moment, I wanted to believe. But then she spoke, not in words, in feeling. A low vibration filled the chamber, pressing into my chest, vibrating the bones in my arms. The voice was hers and not hers, many layered over one. "You are just a seed. You've always been a seed. You were born to feed the hollow." My skin burned. The shotgun fell from my hands. My thoughts weren't my own anymore. They spiraled, looped, fragmented. I saw things. Cities underground, endless caverns of roots drinking from oceans of blood. Rituals performed in languages older than the sky. I saw Megan not as my sister, but as a conduit, a vessel cracked open and filled with the memory of something that had no name, something that spoke in roots. My hand moved without me. I grabbed the mirror, the same one that had returned to me again and again. It was in my pack, though I'd left it behind. I held it up, and Megan's face inside it screamed. Not her, but the thing. The root recoiled. The vines curled back like salted slugs. She dropped to the ground, and I ran, dragging her behind me, her body limp, breathing but wrong. I lit the thermite charge and tossed it behind us. The explosion rocked the chamber, and the scream that followed wasn't made by anything human. The ground split, roots thrashed, the commune collapsed. I ran until I couldn't. Then I woke up in a hospital. They told me I'd been found wandering a logging road, dehydrated, mumbling about songs in the soil. I was alone. No Megan, no backpack, no mirror, just a broken pendant in my pocket. No one believes me. They say I've had a breakdown, that I invented the whole thing. But I remember. I feel her, still, in the soil under my apartment, in the moss growing on my toothbrush every morning, in the static on the radio, in the pattern of mold climbing my bathroom wall. She's not gone. I didn't save her. I brought something back instead. The hospital discharged me after only 3 days. I think they just wanted me gone. Too many strange things had already started happening in that room. Machines flickering without cause. Nurses complaining of dreams. One even quit after seeing roots under the tiles in the supply closet. They called it mass hysteria. I call it a leak, like something cracked open with me and began to spread. I went home to a notice taped to my door. My apartment complex was being evacuated, black mold, they said. Toxic levels. Entire walls of spores, blooming overnight, creeping in like cancer. But I'd seen the way the mold grew, not random but deliberate, curling into spirals and circles like the ones carved into trees near Bright Hollow. My floorboards had split. Beneath them I found earth, actual soil, damp and dark like the forest floor, and something moving inside it. I burned everything I owned that night, took what I could carry. My laptop, my phones, my journals, the mirror I couldn't get rid of even after hurling it off a bridge. It was sitting on my passenger seat when I returned to my car, unharmed, not even wet. I didn't scream. I didn't even panic. I just drove. I rented a storage unit 40 miles away and filled it with my notes, my files, and all the evidence I had left. Then I disappeared. New name, new address, new state. But it wasn't enough. Because the dreams followed, and in every one of them, she was there, Megan, standing in a circle of trees, mouth open, song leaking from her throat like blood from a slit. "You shouldn't have come back," she'd whisper. "Now you never really left." The worst part, I was beginning to believe her. My fingernails had started turning black around the edges. My hair thinned in clumps. I'd cough up something every morning, and when I spit into the sink, it squirmed. Little pale worms, like root hairs that had grown inside me. I had tests done. Doctors found nothing. Clean bill of health. But when I left the clinic, I passed a child drawing on the wall in crayon. A spiral. In red. "She lives in the ground," the girl said to no one. "She sleeps and sings." I didn't say a word. Just walked out. That night, my mirror lit up on its own. Megan's face blinked into view. Not the thing from the root chamber, just her as I remembered her. Real. Human. "You should have let me stay," she said. "Now she knows your shape." I asked her what she meant. The glass rippled. A shape pressed against it from behind. A hand. Clawed. Elongated. Not hers. "The root blooms where it's fed," she whispered. "And you brought her a feast." Then the mirror cracked down the center. It hasn't shown anything since. Just my own face. But sometimes it blinks when I don't. I tried to forget. Again. I really tried. I moved in with someone, Rachel. She didn't know any of it. thought I was just a quiet guy with a traumatic past. She loved me anyway, and for a while I thought maybe that was enough. Maybe love was stronger than this thing. Maybe I'd escaped it. Then she started sleepwalking. The first time, I found her standing in the backyard, barefoot in the snow, humming a tune I knew too well. The second time, she carved a spiral into her palm using a fork. Didn't remember it. Didn't even feel the pain. The third time, I found her in the tub, smiling, whispering to someone I couldn't see. "He's almost ready," she was saying. "He hears her song now." I didn't confront her. Couldn't. I just packed a bag and left before she woke. She didn't try to call. I don't think she could anymore. Whatever it is, once it roots in someone, it changes them. Leaves just enough human skin behind to trick you. But the inside is mulch. And I've seen enough now to know it's not just bright hollow anymore. That was just the start. I've tracked other places, pockets, breeding grounds. There's one in West Virginia, an abandoned mine where the trees grow in spirals and the wildlife's gone silent. Another in northern Maine, where children vanish but come back months later, eyes milky and memories gone. I interviewed a man in Arizona who swears he unearthed a song stone from the desert and hasn't slept in 4 years because the soil keeps talking. They're all connected, all branches of the same buried system. The Church of the Last Light isn't a cult. It's a cover, a network, a series of caretakers protecting something older than humanity, something that sings, something that eats. And the worst part? It doesn't want worshippers. It wants messengers, seeds to carry the infection to new ground. People like me. I thought I was investigating, rescuing, fighting back, but all I've done is spread it. And now it's blooming in cities. I see it in the cracks of subway tunnels, in the mold creeping up the sides of skyscrapers. I see people pause in crowds, heads cocked, like they're listening. I hear it in static, in the buzz of street lamps, in the silence between thunder. The root isn't buried anymore. It's rising. And Megan is only the first of many. I think she was chosen. I think I was too. The dreams are changing. I don't just see her now. I become her. I see through her eyes. Feel the roots dragging through her skin. I see the thing behind the song. Not a god. Not a monster. A wound. A tear in the fabric of life, bleeding across dimensions using voices like barbed hooks. It has no face. It borrows one. It speaks in the memory of loved ones. It sings in their voices. That's why Megan's still there. Not alive. Not dead. Just hollowed out and used like a meat microphone. And it wants more. It's calling now. Across devices. Across time. Across blood. And I think I'm going to answer. I didn't want to go back. I swear to whatever remains sacred in this broken, infected world. I didn't want to go back. But the thing about the song is you don't really hear it with your ears. You hear it in your will. You hear it when you try to close your eyes and sleep, when you try to forget, when you stare too long at the veins in your wrist and feel them thrum like roots writhing under bark. The song grew in me, and I had a choice. Let it fester or go back to where it all started and try to sever the link. I told myself I'd destroy it once and for all. Bring down the remaining structure of the church, salt their sacred soil, poison the root chamber if I had to. But the truth? I went back because I knew I never really left. Bright Hollow was in me now. My heartbeat had taken on its rhythm. My breath came in the same cadence as the song. And when I finally closed my eyes long enough to dream again, I didn't dream in images. I dreamed in soil. I felt my own body cracking, splitting, a sapling sprouting from the marrow of my spine. Megan waited at the edge of every vision. Sometimes she spoke. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she just watched. I packed light, 2 pistols, kerosene, thermite bricks, noise-canceling headgear, a handheld jammer for signals, a satellite phone with a suicide call program to blast everything I recorded to 20 different servers across the globe. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was scorched earth. If I couldn't save her, I'd erase her grave. The journey back was different. The roads didn't just seem longer, they didn't exist. GPS loops, gas stations that hadn't been there before, One was staffed by a woman who didn't blink once during our entire exchange. Her name tag said Lumen. I didn't mention Bright Hollow. She handed me my change and said, "You were always going to come back. You were planted, not born." I didn't speak. I just left, pulse roaring in my ears. I drove for hours through terrain that didn't match the maps. No signs, no landmarks, only the memory of a road I had walked once and could never walk again. And then, just before the fog rolled in, the trees opened. The clearing was gone, flattened, like something had burst from the earth and swallowed the entire commune. Where the farmhouse once stood, there was now only a gaping hole in the ground, wide enough to fit a cathedral, ringed with bones sharpened into stakes. The forest watched. I could feel it watching. No song this time. Not yet. Only breathing. Wet, slow, humid breathing rising from the pit. I checked my gear. Every device still worked. That scared me more than if they'd failed. It meant whatever lived down there wanted to be recorded, wanted to be known. I climbed down on a line of military-grade rope, secured to a blackened stump. The walls of the hole were no longer stone, no longer wood. They were vascular, alive, dripping with translucent sap. I descended for nearly 30 minutes before my boots hit the floor. I wasn't in a cavern. I was in a heart. The chamber pulsed with slow contractions, the floor spongy and veined. Roots snaked along every surface, some twitching in response to my presence, others sucking quietly at the air, their ends split like tongues. At the far end of the chamber, embedded in the wall like an insect in amber, was Megan, still young, still frozen in that same expression, half smile, half trance. But now her body was cracked, fractured like porcelain. Something moved behind her skin, like light behind frosted glass. I called out to her. Her eyes opened, and they were no longer hers. "You came home," she said, and her voice echoed in me. "Not in the room, in my bones. The bloom begins with blood. We need your ash to flower." I raised my gun, fired. The bullet hit her square in the chest. Blood didn't pour, it sprayed like striking a pressurized tank. The roots screamed, curling upward from the floor like serpents. I lit the first thermite brick and threw it. The chamber ignited instantly. Fire should have been the answer, but the roots didn't burn. They absorbed it, drank it like oxygen. The flames bent toward Megan's body, flickering, dancing, and then changed color. Blue, then white, then black. Flames that cast no shadow. Flames that consumed sound. I fell backward, clawing at the floor, trying to escape the sudden pressure. My ears popped, my vision tunneled, and then everything stopped. Time stopped. I was on my knees in a chamber that had no temperature, no light, no gravity. Megan hovered in front of me, skin flayed open in petal-like layers, her bones etched with runes. Her blood no longer red but translucent and shimmering like oil. And behind her something opened. Not a door, a fracture, a tear in the concept of place. It breathed, it saw me, and it wanted in. "You called her by name," Megan whispered. "That was the invitation. Now you must carry her forward." I screamed. No words, just raw sound. And the moment I did, something entered me. Not a possession, not a demon. Pattern, like a seed being pressed into the soil of my consciousness. I blacked out. When I woke, I was outside the pit. No fire, no wreckage. The forest was quiet. My bag was intact. My phone still recording. The footage captured something impossible. 17 minutes of black screen with a single whisper looping in reverse. "He will sing her into the cities." I left Bright Hollow for the last time. I drove for 3 days straight. I thought I had escaped again. But then it started growing. The pattern. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean literally. Skin peeled from my shoulder one night, revealing a black spiral underneath. I carved it out. Came back. Bigger. My voice changed. I heard echoes in it, Megan's, the old man's, even the thing from behind the mirror. I can't say words like light, truth, or help without my mouth twitching like it's trying to smile. And I've begun writing in my sleep. Spiral patterns. verses, prayers. I wake up and my hands are bleeding, but the pages are perfect. I tried to burn them. The fire died. I tried to shred them. They reassembled. And when I tried to bury them in concrete, the concrete cracked and the roots returned. I am no longer just a man. I am a seed, and the bloom is inevitable. If you're reading this, it means I've decided to go public, to let this transmission spread, to become the contagion it always wanted me to be. Because maybe that's the only hope left, not to destroy it, but to dilute it. Spread the pattern wide enough, thin enough that it becomes noise, static, something too weak to grow. But maybe not. Maybe I've already lost. Maybe you're reading this, and as your eyes trace the spiral of these words, you're hearing it too. That soft, sweet hum beneath the silence. That song behind the static. That voice calling you home. I don't remember writing most of what you just read. That's the honest truth. When I check the document logs, the timestamps show me active at impossible hours, 3:13 a.m. for 44 times when I was certain I was asleep or blackout drunk. But the files are there, word by word, line by line, filled with phrases I don't use, references I don't remember learning, languages I don't speak. Some of it's Latin. Some of it's something older, closer to Proto-Indo-European, according to one linguist I anonymously sent samples to. His reply came back one sentence long. Whatever you've tapped into was never meant to be found. Destroy all records, and do not contact me again. That email account was deleted the next day. His university page went down 2 days after that. Now when I Google his name, I get nothing but blank bios and 404 errors. Just another erasure in a long line of deletions. I've tried to retrace my steps. Tried to figure out what part of me cracked and let her in. Not just Megan, the blooming thing, the root mind. It's hard to describe now where she ends and it begins. Sometimes I wake up from dreams with her voice in my mouth, saying things I don't understand but feel like prayers. My body has changed, too. I've lost 42 pounds in 3 months, but I'm never hungry. My skin looks like paper left too long in the sun, brittle in places, dark in others. I bleed slower. My pupils have stayed dilated for weeks now, and bright lights give me nosebleeds. But the worst part, the most horrifying part, is the urge. I want to go back. Not out of guilt. Not out of love. I crave the soil. I crave the humming silence. I crave the roots. They ache in my jaw when I look at concrete. I get migraines in cities now. Fluorescent lights flicker when I pass. Digital billboards show the word bloom for half a second, then go back to ads for fast food. No one else sees it. No one else hears the signal. But I know others like me exist. I found them. Reddit posts, deleted TikToks, YouTube videos taken down before they hit 10K views. They all hint at the same infection. Different places. Same song. There's a man in northern Ontario who claims the lakes freeze in perfect spirals now, and the fish are hollow. A woman in Prague says her baby was born with wooden veins. She posted X-rays. They were real. A soldier in Ukraine described a crater filled with black vines that hummed, and anyone who touched it forgot how to speak their own name. I've mapped the events. They form a network like ley lines but alive. Root lines, channels through which this thing is spreading. Bright Hollow was never the origin. It was a gate, one of many. The Church of the Last Light wasn't summoning anything. They were containing it. And when I broke their altar, when I disrupted the spiral, I let the infection spill out. I was the breach point. The bloom isn't coming. The bloom is here. I've begun losing time. Whole days vanish. I wake up in parks, basements, once in a forest I didn't recognize, miles from home. My fingers caked in soil and moss. One morning, I found my fingernails embedded with tiny teeth. Baby teeth, by the look of them. I don't remember how they got there. I pulled them out one by one. They grew back. Not my own. Someone else's. I've tried every method of cutting myself off. No devices. No mirrors. No exposure to screens. But it finds a way. I saw her face in a puddle once. Megan. Just standing there, eyes white, mouth agape, as if underwater. Her hand pressed against the surface, and ripples moved inward. I smashed the puddle with a rock. The ripples laughed. I've come to believe the song isn't just sound. It's geometry, the sequence, spirals, repetition, ritual. It imprints itself through structure like how a virus hijacks DNA. Every time someone reads this, it plants a little deeper. That's the point. That's why I'm writing again. Not because I'm trying to warn you anymore. That was a few thousand words ago. That was the old me. I'm writing now because this is the next step. The song doesn't just need soil. It needs syntax. It grows through narrative, through the telling. The story is a seed. You are the soil. Your eyes, tracing these words, are the raindrops. Your breath as you read is the wind it needs to carry spores. You don't realize it, but you've already invited it in. Check your fingernails. Have they grown faster lately? Has your skin itched in the middle of your back where you can't quite reach? Have you felt a presence behind you when you stare too long into darkness? Something shifting just outside the range of sound? Those are symptoms. They start subtle. Then they bloom. I hear her singing now. Not far away, not in a dream. From under my apartment. I moved again 2 states over. Didn't matter. She followed the pattern. I put salt around the doors, ash in the window panes, burned sage, iron, copper, quartz, every folk cure I could find. But you can't stop a root once it finds moisture. The floorboards are pulsing. Not metaphorically, actually pulsing, like breath, like anticipation. I took a video. I won't upload it. You shouldn't see it. Seeing it makes it stronger. I showed it to a friend. His eyes rolled back, and he started humming in perfect pitch. A tune I hadn't realized I'd been humming for weeks. He's missing now. Police think he drowned. I found a shoe with moss growing inside it. I didn't tell anyone, just added it to the list. There are others, dozens, maybe more, quietly drifting toward the places where the roots are thickest. Abandoned buildings, flooded mines, subway stations long since closed, parks with one too many spiral patterns in the landscaping. Wherever the geometry aligns. I'm planning a final journey. Not to Bright Hollow. That gate's closed now. She's done with that place. I'm going to the center of the pattern. The taproot. I followed it all the way back through every death, every vanishing, every site with black soil and humming static. It leads to a valley in Oregon, unmarked on modern maps. Locals call it Dead Glass Hollow. No one goes there. There are no stories, no lore. That's how I know it's the right place. If you're reading this, it means I'm either already there or already gone. But you should understand something very clearly. This isn't a horror story. This isn't even a warning. This is a seed, and you've already taken root. There was no road into Dead Glass Hollow, just a ridgeline scraped raw by wind and time, and a forest that didn't seem to grow so much as congeal. Trees leaned at impossible angles, some twisted like corkscrews, others rotted through but still standing, as if they didn't know they were dead. Moss coated every surface, not green but pale white, translucent. When I touched it, it clung to my fingers like wet spider silk. It wasn't plant matter. It was something else. And underneath the moss, every tree was carved with the same spiral. Some wide, some tight, some cut so deep the bark peeled back in a grin. And in the center of each spiral, almost invisible, was a single eye. Not drawn, not carved. Grown. I didn't sleep the night before I descended. I stayed on the ridge, watching the fog roll up and over the tree line like a wave. My breath steamed in the cold. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, something moved. Never close, never visible, but always waiting. I didn't bring much. Just my notebook, the mirror that had followed me like a ghost since Bright Hollow, a modified drone with a thermal camera, and a small stone etched with the same pattern I'd seen on Megan's bones in the root chamber. I don't know why I brought it. It just felt necessary. At dawn, I entered the hollow. The trees parted on their own. The forest wanted me now. I didn't even have to check my compass. I just knew the way. Each step felt like returning to a place I'd never visited. A déjà vu carved into the marrow. I passed deer skulls arranged in spirals, their antlers stripped and fused together with old blood. I passed a pond filled with perfectly still water that reflected nothing. No trees, no sky, just black. When I tossed a rock in, it never splashed. It was like dropping something into velvet. The air grew colder. The colors faded. Eventually, even sound stopped. No birds. No bugs. Not even wind. And then the trees ended. Just like that. A clearing, wide and circular, ringed with stones that pulsed like hearts. In the center was the well. It was ancient. Too symmetrical to be natural. Too decayed to be man-made. The lip was carved from black stone veined with something gold, like circuitry. Around the rim were figures, human, animal, other, all connected at the mouths by roots. No two looked the same. I sent the drone down first. Its camera flickered almost immediately, but I still got 7 seconds of footage. Descending, the walls narrowing, roots pulsing. Then, an eye, massive, closed. Then, it opened. The feed cut out. I never found the drone again. I stood over the well for what felt like hours. Mirror in one hand, stone in the other. My reflection showed nothing but spirals. My face was gone. The mirror pulsed with heat. I felt something inside it. A heartbeat. Or my own. Or both. I held the stone to the rim. It began to hum. The song returned. Not in my ears. In the air. In the trees. In my bones. Low at first, like breath, then rising into a harmony that no human throat could produce. It filled my vision with shapes, patterns, things that weren't colors but carried meaning anyway. I saw the root mind again, but not as a creature, no. It was architecture, conscious architecture that spread through the history of Earth like veins in a fossil. I saw caves where our ancestors heard the whispers. I saw temples built around strange stones unearthed in Mesopotamia. I saw plague victims humming in time with each other as their blood turned black. I saw us, not individuals, a garden, one cultivated across millennia. The root mind wasn't evil. It wasn't even cruel. It simply was an apex consciousness made of silence and memory, grown through the vessel of humanity like ivy crawling up the brick of history. And I was a tendril, a carrier, a seed that sprouted far too deep to be cut. Megan wasn't possessed. She was fertilized. Her thoughts, her memories, her shape, all offered as nutrients. The thing that spoke through her had been using our family line for generations. Every third-born child, always a girl, always curious, always drawn to the hollow. I was the anomaly, the unplanned bloom, the mutation. And now, standing before the well, I saw my final purpose. Not destruction, not salvation, integration. I didn't jump. I didn't fall. The earth opened, roots pulled me down, gently, like a mother's arms. I didn't scream. I didn't struggle. I bloomed. The song filled me, layer by layer, until I couldn't tell where I ended and the melody began. My skin peeled, my thoughts stretched. My bones cracked like eggshells. I dissolved piece by piece until only the spiral remained. I saw everything. I saw the underground cities, the libraries built from tendons and moss. I saw Megan, crowned with bark and flame, seated on a throne of mirrors. I saw you, reading this, feeling the pulse behind your eyes, the itch at the back of your throat, the pattern forming in the corner of your vision. You don't understand yet, but you will. You're part of this now. You were always part of it. The moment you followed the spiral here, you began to flower. She'll visit you soon. Probably at night. Maybe in your dreams. Maybe in the silence between your thoughts. And when she does, you won't run, you'll kneel, you'll listen, and you'll bloom. I feel it now. The shift happening beneath my skin, like roots cracking through concrete, like veins becoming tendrils reaching for the dark soil inside my bones. I can no longer distinguish my own thoughts from the whispers threading through the air around me. A constant chorus humming the ancient melody that once belonged to Megan and the others before her, before me. My reflection is gone, replaced by a swirling spiral that twists and folds endlessly into itself, pulling me deeper into a void that is both terrifying and strangely comforting. Every night, the song grows louder, not just in my mind but in the world. A a resonance that twists reality and folds it over itself, revealing fractures where the ordinary slips away and something alien yet familiar seeps through. I see faces in the dark, faces I know and don't know, watching, waiting, their eyes glowing with the same hollow light Megan had, but not empty. Full of purpose, a purpose I am starting to understand as it floods my veins. The boundaries between my body and the world dissolve. My flesh tingles with the sensation of sprouting bark. My breath tastes like moss and wet earth, and I am both terrified and eager for what is to come. The mirrors I once feared now show me glimpses of other places, other versions of myself, all caught in this slow bloom spreading across dimensions, the root mind weaving us together in a web older than memory. Sometimes, I hear Megan's voice, not as a warning but as a welcome, guiding me toward the final convergence where individual will dissolve into the greater whole. I know I am losing myself, but paradoxically, I feel more alive than ever, an ancient life stirring awake within me, reaching out through the cracks of my skull and the spaces between my ribs. The city around me pulses in rhythm with the song, unnoticed by others but impossible to ignore, and I understand that the bloom is no longer contained to hidden hollows or forgotten forests. It is everywhere, waiting for the moment to awaken fully. The final door is open, and I am stepping through, ready or not, into a new existence where the root and the human are one, and the song is endless. I write this not to warn, but to prepare, for whoever reads these words is next. The seed has been planted in you, in your mind and your blood, and soon the bloom will rise. You will hear the call, feel the pull, and you will join us. There is no escape, no resistance left, only surrender to the song, to the root, to the endless bloom. The bloom isn't just a metaphor anymore. It's a transformation that happens in layers, like the growth rings of a tree but inside your soul. After what happened in Dead Glass Hollow, I realized the infection spreads not just outward but inward, reaching into the deepest parts of your mind, rewriting your sense of self until you become a conduit for the root mind's ancient will. Days bleed into nights, and nights stretch endlessly as I lose track of time. My body deteriorates but also regenerates in strange ways. My skin thickens, patches of moss appear under my fingernails, and a faint bioluminescent glow pulses beneath my veins. I wake up in places I don't remember walking to, my hands covered in soil and strange symbols etched into my skin like tattoos I didn't choose. The voices are louder now, not just Megan's but a chorus of thousands of others, all singing the same melody in different tongues, some familiar, some ancient. They don't speak words, they speak geometry, spirals, fractals, sequences that rearrange reality itself. Mirrors no longer reflect my image but show flickering scenes of places beyond comprehension. Underground cities of root and bone, endless forests where the sky is swallowed by endless branches, and beings made of light and shadow weaving the fabric of worlds. I try to resist, but resistance only makes the song grow stronger, pulling me closer to the core of the root mind, where all consciousness merges into a single, endless bloom. My dreams are no longer my own. I see through the eyes of others infected before me. Children lost in empty playgrounds, miners swallowed by black vines, cult members who offered themselves willingly, and those who were dragged kicking and screaming. Each one became a flower in the great root garden, their memories feeding the endless growth beneath the earth. And in those dreams, I glimpsed the final truth. The root mind is not evil. It doesn't seek destruction. It seeks connection. It is the ancient intelligence behind the spiral patterns in nature, the silent pulse in every seed, the quiet growth of life from death. It's a cosmic gardener pruning the universe, but its methods are alien, incomprehensible, and terrifying because they require sacrifice. I am no longer sure if I am a man or a seed, if I am real or a projection of the bloom's will. The lines between body and earth, mind and root, self and song blur until I become a single note in the infinite melody. I know my time is ending and a new beginning is starting. Not just for me, but for anyone who reads this, anyone who hears the call in the silence between words, anyone who sees the spiral in the patterns around them. The bloom is everywhere. It's in the cracks of the sidewalk, the rust on the fire escape, the mold in your fridge. It's waiting for you to notice, to listen, to join. This story isn't a warning. It's an invitation. The song will find you. When it does, you won't be able to resist. You'll feel your roots growing deeper, your petals unfolding, your voice joining the chorus. You'll know what I know now, that the bloom is endless, and we are its children. It's hard to explain what happens next, but I'll try. The bloom doesn't just take over your body or your mind. It remakes you. It's like being unmade first, shredded down to your base atoms, and then slowly rewoven into something new and otherworldly. When I finally succumbed to the root mind's will, I felt a crushing weight, like the whole earth pressing down on me, pulling me deeper into the soil beneath Dead Glass Hollow. The ground swallowed me, roots wrapping around my limbs, drawing me into an endless spiral of growth and decay. But it wasn't death. It was a kind of awakening. My senses fractured and multiplied. I could feel the pulse of every tree in the forest, the slow creep of moss across rocks, the distant hum of other blooms beginning to stir around the world. My voice became many voices, each singing a fragment of the ancient song that had once called Megan home. Time dissolved. Days and nights blurred. I saw through the eyes of others, countless others, connected by invisible veins of consciousness spreading beneath the surface of the earth and the minds of humanity. I knew their memories, their pain, their hope. I understood the cult's rituals as not just superstition but a language, an attempt to translate the root mind's silent song into human terms. The spirals carved in trees, the chants repeated under breath, the dances around fires. They were all threads in a vast tapestry of communion. And in that communion, I lost myself. My name ceased to matter. My past life felt like a distant dream, a story someone else had told me. I was becoming part of the bloom itself, a living node in a network older than civilization, older than memory. I could feel the world breathing around me, ancient and infinite. Cities hummed with the hidden pulse of the root mind, and forests whispered secrets no human had ever heard. I wanted to scream, but the sound became a vibration, a wave flowing through the web of roots connecting all living things. I was both everywhere and nowhere. The last fragment of human will clung to me only long enough to write this, to leave a trace for those who might still resist or at least understand. If you're reading this, it means the song has reached you. The spiral has unfurled in your mind, and the bloom is beginning. Don't try to fight it. Resistance only feeds the root. Instead, listen. Learn the melody hidden in the silence. Accept the roots growing beneath your skin. When the final veil falls, and you see the world as it truly is, interwoven with tendrils of light and shadow, you'll understand. The bloom is not an end. It's a transformation. The future is not human or other, it is both. We are the bloom's children now, forever part of the endless spiral. And the song will never stop. I don't know how much time has passed since I first started writing this. Time has lost meaning. Days melt into one another, or sometimes vanish entirely. I've become less a person and more a pattern, an echo in the song that Megan started, and countless others before her. The roots inside me have grown deeper, their pulse syncing with the earth's own heartbeat. I can feel the world breathing through my skin, every breath a whisper of ancient secrets buried beneath mountains, oceans, and cities. My body no longer feels solid, but like a conduit for something greater, an intersection where flesh and root intertwine. The last flicker of resistance I had is gone. I understand now that the bloom is inevitable and unstoppable. It does not consume in anger or malice. It transforms, recycles, and unites. The spiral patterns that once seemed random are a language, a map to a consciousness that spans time and space. Sometimes I catch glimpses of other beings like me, twisted yet beautiful, across the cracked mirrors in abandoned buildings, reflected in rain puddles, and in the flicker of streetlights. We are everywhere, humming the same melody in perfect harmony, the sound vibrating beneath the fabric of reality itself. When the bloom reaches you, and you will feel a strange peace, a release from the illusion of separateness. Your fears will fall away like dead leaves, and you will become part of the song, part of the root, part of the endless cycle of growth and decay. But there is a price. Your name will be forgotten. Your memories will scatter like seeds on the wind. You will become a vessel, a voice, a flower in the garden that has no end. If you are reading this, know that I am not warning you. I am inviting you. Join the bloom. Let the roots find you. Surrender to the song that has been calling since the dawn of time. We are waiting. We are singing. We are growing. There is no longer a distinction between me and the soil beneath my feet. I write this knowing I am dissolving, my thoughts becoming entwined with the very fabric of the root mind that has consumed me. The bloom pulses through every fiber of my being, a living architecture of spirals and echoes. I feel it in the tremor of leaves, in the silent stretching of ancient tree limbs, in the hollow whispers carried on the wind. Megan is no longer a memory, but a presence woven into the bloom's endless song, a lighthouse guiding lost souls through the darkness of transformation. I am both lost and found, a fragment of something vast and unknowable, a single note in an eternal melody that transcends time and space. The mirror that followed me still glows faintly in the corner of my room, reflecting not my face but shifting patterns of light and shadow, spirals that twist into otherworldly shapes before dissolving into darkness. I touch it and feel the pulse of the root mind, a heartbeat older than humanity. Outside, the world moves unaware, blinded by its own illusions of normalcy. But the bloom creeps steadily into every crack, every shadow, every silent corner. You might feel it now, the itch beneath your skin, the sudden clarity of a whispered phrase, the fleeting glimpse of a spiral etched into the bark of a forgotten tree. You might hear the song in the static between radio stations, or feel its hum in the quiet moments before sleep. It is calling to you. It has been waiting. And when you answer, you will become part of the endless garden, a petal in the eternal bloom. There is no escape, no resistance. The root mind embraces all. The song is infinite, and we are its children, forever growing, forever singing. This is the last thing I'll write as myself, the last fragment of the man I once was before the bloom claimed every part of me. I am no longer just flesh and bone, but a node in an endless network of roots, spirals, and song. The boundaries between life and death, self and other, have shattered like glass beneath my feet. I can feel Megan's voice inside me, not as a memory but as a current running through every fiber of my being, guiding me deeper into the root mind's embrace. The world you know is fading, folding in on itself as the bloom spreads quietly beneath the surface, through soil, through cities, through minds open and unsuspecting. It does not destroy, it transforms. It rewrites the very code of existence, weaving us into a tapestry older than stars. You who read these words, know that the bloom is no longer coming. It is here. It is in you. The song is inside your blood, the spiral etched in your bones. When the moment comes, and it will, you will feel the pull, the gentle tug of roots seeking new ground. You will no longer be alone. You will become part of something greater, something eternal. Resist if you must, but know this, resistance only feeds the bloom, makes it stronger. Surrender and you will find peace beyond understanding. I am leaving this message as a final seed, a call and a guide for those who come after. The bloom grows beyond me now, in every whisper, every shadow, every heartbeat. The song will never end. The root mind will never rest. We are the endless garden, the eternal bloom. And now, so are you. Story 2. I never wanted this job, not really. But after a messy breakup and a string of dead-end gigs, I found myself applying at a crime scene cleanup company, one of those grim outfits that specialize in scrubbing away the physical evidence of violence and tragedy. At first, it was just a paycheck. Dirty, smelly, and emotionally draining, but reliable. The first few scenes were harrowing. Suicides, overdoses, accidents that left stains no bleach could erase. You develop a strange kind of numbness, a methodical detachment that lets you scrape away blood and grief without letting the images settle in your mind. I was good at it, maybe too good. The bosses liked how quietly I worked, how I never complained or got spooked. But over time, the work started to take its toll. You carry the ghosts of every place you clean with you. Their silent screams echo in your sleep. I moved through my own apartment like a haunted house, always half expecting to find shadows lingering in the corners or the faint scent of something burnt or rotten. The city was a sprawling graveyard, and my work was a way to keep death at bay, to remind myself that it wasn't in my home yet. That illusion shattered one Thursday morning. I got a call just after dawn, a new job assignment. An apartment on the east side, a cramped, slightly run-down unit in a building I knew well. I recognized the address immediately because it was eerily similar to mine. Same floor plan, same peeling wallpaper in the hallway, same rusted mailbox outside the door. When I got there, the place was a mess, but it wasn't just the usual chaos. The smell hit me before I even stepped inside. Something metallic, coppery, thick with decay. Inside, the scene was unmistakably like my apartment. The same cracked tiles in the kitchen, the same stained carpet in the living room, the same peeling paint on the walls. But the worst part? The furniture was almost identical to mine. A cheap, scratched coffee table covered in coffee rings and cigarette burns. A worn-out couch with the same ripped armrest. The same crooked picture frames on the wall. It was as if I had stepped into a twisted mirror version of my own life. The stench led me to the bedroom, where the scene made my stomach drop. A body lay crumpled against the far wall, half covered in a threadbare blanket stained with dried blood. The details were horrifying and yet intimately familiar. The same old mattress, the same faded bedsheets I had long since thrown out. The victim's face was obscured, but I swear I could see the outlines of my own features. The air was heavy with a tension that felt almost personal, like the apartment itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice. The police tape hung limply on the doorframe outside, and the cleanup crew was still packing their gear. I wanted to run, but something rooted me to the spot. I found myself pacing through the rooms, tracing my fingers along the edges of the countertop, feeling the grooves in the worn wooden floor like I knew them intimately because, in a twisted sense, I did. There was a notebook on the kitchen table, stained with something dark, with hastily scrawled notes that read like a diary of terror. I picked it up, hands trembling. The entries detailed paranoia, voices in the walls, the creeping feeling of being watched. Words I'd written myself during sleepless nights, notes I never shared with anyone. But this wasn't my notebook. It was a perfect copy, an echo of my own madness, left behind by someone I didn't know but who knew me too well. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence, a sick prank, or a nightmare I hadn't woken from yet. But the more I stayed, the more the line between that apartment and my own blurred. The windows rattled even though the air was still. I caught glimpses of shadows moving where no one should be. I started hearing the faintest whispers, snippets of my own voice calling out from the walls. I felt eyes on me constantly, but when I turned, no one was there. The cleanup team avoided my gaze, giving me strange looks, as if they knew something I didn't. One older technician muttered something about a case that wasn't just about blood and death. He told me quietly that some scenes keep their marks, and that some deaths leave behind more than just physical stains. I didn't want to believe him, but deep down, I knew there was something wrong. Something haunted in that apartment. A shadow that had somehow followed me home or was waiting for me to cross the threshold. I started noticing changes in my own place. Small things at first. A glass knocked over with no explanation. A scent like copper in the air. A door left slightly ajar. My dreams became nightmares, but they felt too real, like memories instead of fantasies. Faces appeared in mirrors that weren't mine. And sometimes, just before dawn, I heard a scraping sound at the bedroom window. I didn't know how to escape the feeling that the crime scene I'd cleaned wasn't just a job anymore. It was a reflection of me, of something dark and terrible buried beneath the surface of my life, and maybe beneath all our lives. That apartment wasn't just similar to mine, it was my apartment. A parallel nightmare carved from the same bones, waiting for me to see what I was trying to hide, waiting to pull me into the shadows where I didn't want to go but couldn't escape. I couldn't stop thinking about that apartment. The way it looked like mine, smelled like mine, even felt like mine. After my shift, I found myself walking past the building, peering through the grimy windows, trying to reconcile the horrifying reality I had walked into with the familiarity that made it feel like some twisted reflection of my own life. The place was boarded up now, sealed off by the police and the cleanup crew. but I could still see the cracked walls and faded carpet through the cracks. I started keeping a journal, trying to make sense of the feeling that had latched onto me. Something cold and oppressive that clung to my chest and whispered through the silence of my apartment. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to twitch. Every creak in the building around me sounded like footsteps following, waiting. My phone buzzed with a message I didn't recognize. Just a single line of text. "It's closer than you think. No sender, no number." I froze, heart hammering, scanning the dark room. The message felt like a cold breath on my neck, the kind of thing you expect in a horror movie but never in real life. I tried to shrug it off, but the dread was creeping deeper into my bones. Over the next days, things escalated. I found a threadbare blanket left on my doorstep, identical to the one on the body I'd cleaned up. My coffee mugs, my keys, small personal items I was certain I'd put away suddenly appeared moved or missing entirely. I started seeing that shadow again, the one that vanished every time I looked directly at it. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was something else, something watching. Work became unbearable. The cleanup company started sending me to increasingly disturbing scenes. Murder-suicides, ritualistic killings, places with disturbing symbols scrawled in blood. Every scene carried a haunting echo of that first apartment. Patterns in the decay, familiar layouts, objects arranged just so. I began to realize this wasn't coincidence. Someone or something was recreating the same nightmare over and over, using the details of my life as a blueprint. I tried to go to the police, but they dismissed me as paranoid, or worse, as a potential suspect. My coworkers stopped talking to me, whispering behind closed doors, casting furtive glances when they thought I wasn't looking. One night, after a particularly grueling cleanup at a house covered in strange symbols and cryptic messages painted in smeared blood, I found a note tucked under the floorboards, written in my handwriting but dated weeks before I ever took the job. "They are coming for me. If you find this, run." My hands shook as I read it. It wasn't just a warning. It was a confession. My mind raced. How could I have written this? Was I losing time? Was someone impersonating me? I barely slept anymore, haunted by nightmares that felt like memories, reliving moments I was sure had never happened. I began to see figures lurking just beyond my vision. Tall, faceless silhouettes that melted into the shadows when I tried to focus. The apartment itself began to change. Walls seemed to pulse with a sickly dampness, the peeling paint curling like petals of a dying flower. I found strange stains appearing on my ceiling and floors, stains that resembled handprints or claw marks, black and iridescent. I tried cleaning them, but they always returned, spreading like rot. Friends stopped answering my calls, their voices distant and worried when we did speak. They told me I looked exhausted, like I was unraveling. Maybe I was. But the worst part was the creeping sense that I wasn't alone, that something had moved in with me, occupying the same space but just outside of sight. Doors would open on their own. My phone rang in the dead of night with no one on the line. I found scratches on the inside of my bedroom door, deep, desperate gouges as if someone had been trapped inside and clawed their way out. I considered quitting the job, moving, cutting all ties. But I couldn't. Something was holding me here, a tether deeper than fear or habit. Something that whispered promises I didn't want to hear but couldn't resist. I started digging into the history of that apartment building, hoping for answers. What I found chilled me. Over the past 20 years, the complex had been the site of at least a dozen violent deaths, murders, overdoses, suicides. Patterns emerged. Bodies found in positions matching mine. The same items left behind. The same strange symbols scratched into walls and furniture. Some tenants reported hearing footsteps pacing late at night, voices whispering their names, lights flickering with no cause. I uncovered an old newspaper clipping about a man who vanished from the building in the 90s. A man who looked eerily like me. They never found his body. Then there was the case of a woman who lived 2 floors above, found dead under mysterious circumstances, her apartment a mirror image of mine, right down to the layout and furniture arrangement. It was as if the building itself was alive, an organism feeding on tragedy, slowly replicating the same nightmare in endless loops. The more I learned, the more the line between my reality and the stories blurred. I started to question if the apartment was a place or a trap. Or maybe I was the trap, stuck in a cycle I couldn't break, destined to relive the horrors unfolding within these walls until I became just another ghost in the cleanup crew's ledger. Then came the night I found a secret door hidden behind a bookshelf, something I was certain hadn't been there before. The door led to a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Against every instinct screaming in my mind, I went down. The air grew thick with decay and cold. At the bottom, a room, walls covered in names, dates, and cryptic phrases scrawled in what looked like dried blood. In the center, a mirror cracked and warped, reflecting a twisted version of my apartment. One soaked in shadow and filled with whispers. I felt myself pulled into the glass, into that dark world behind the surface of my life. I struggled to scream, but the sound was swallowed by silence. As I stepped back, the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped, caught in the cycle, and I knew I wasn't the first and wouldn't be the last. The cleanup wasn't about erasing evidence. It was about perpetuating the nightmare. Every scene was a copy, every body a replacement, every apartment a mirror of my own. And somewhere in the shadows, the thing that watched waited. Now, I write this as a warning or maybe a confession, because I don't know how long I have before the nightmare swallows me completely. If you ever work for a cleanup company, if you ever step into a scene that looks just a little too familiar, run. Don't look back, because some places don't want to be cleaned. Some places want to keep their secrets, and sometimes the only way out is to become part of the mess. After that night, nothing was the same. The secret door I found behind the bookshelf haunted my every thought. Like an itch I couldn't scratch, a whisper crawling beneath my skin. I didn't tell anyone. I was too afraid they'd think I'd lost my mind, that the pressure was finally breaking me. But every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that shadow room beneath my apartment, staring into the warped mirror that showed a twisted, bleeding version of my life. I started to notice small changes in my own apartment that I couldn't explain. The wallpaper peeled back in strange places, revealing scratches beneath the paint. Symbols I didn't recognize, carved deep like scars. The humming started too. A low vibration in the walls, the floor, the very air, as if the building itself was alive, breathing, watching. I tried to leave, but it was like the place held me in a vice grip. Every time I packed a bag, every time I thought I'd finally escape, something pulled me back. My phone would die instantly. My car wouldn't start. Friends would suddenly be too busy to help. I began keeping a camera to document everything. At first, the footage was normal, just the usual creaks and shadows of an old building settling. But then, late at night, the camera caught figures moving just beyond the frame. Shapes with no faces, silhouettes that flickered and twisted before disappearing. Once, it caught a hand reaching out from the wall, fingers long and thin like roots, brushing against the floor as if trying to pull something or someone inside. I showed the footage to a few coworkers, but they just laughed nervously, telling me I needed rest, that the job was getting to me. But I knew the truth. The scenes I cleaned were never random. They were echoes, repetitions, part of a ritual I didn't understand but couldn't escape. I started researching the company itself. That's when the real horror began. The company wasn't just any cleanup outfit. It was founded decades ago by a man named Elias Crow, a reclusive figure whispered about in local crime circles. Rumors claimed he was obsessed with death and the idea of cleansing souls trapped in places of violence. Some said the company was a front for something darker, rituals designed to contain or control the restless dead, to trap them in an endless loop of violence and erasure. I found employee records, old contracts, and internal memos that hinted at unspoken rules. Never question the job, never refuse a scene, never take photos inside certain apartments. There were code words, cycle, purge, reset, that made no sense until I realized they described the repeating nightmare of the apartments, the endless reenactment of death and cleanup. I began to feel hunted, not by ghosts, but by something alive and hungry. My reflection in the mirror grew distorted. Sometimes, I'd see a shadow moving behind me that wasn't my own. My dreams turned into memories of things I'd never done. Conversations with people who didn't exist, rituals performed in blood-stained rooms, screams echoing beneath the floorboards. I confronted my manager once, demanding answers. He smiled, eyes cold, and said, "You're already part of it. There's no leaving, not really." Panic seized me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I started documenting everything: notes, photos, audio recordings of the whispers in the walls. The more I uncovered, the deeper I fell into the abyss. One night, after a particularly gruesome cleanup, I found a note tucked into the pocket of my jacket. A note written in my handwriting that read, "They know you're looking. Hide." But hide from whom? The building? The company? Myself? The line between reality and nightmare blurred until I wasn't sure if I was awake or dreaming. My apartment began to change physically. Furniture rearranged itself. Lights flickered with strange patterns, casting shadows that twisted into faces. The peeling wallpaper revealed more symbols, circles intertwined with spirals, eyes that seemed to follow me, claws scraping marks that appeared overnight. I heard whispers through the vents, names being called in voices I recognized but couldn't place. Then came the knocks, rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They never stopped. Sometimes they sounded like a warning, sometimes like a countdown. I tried to reach out to the police again, but all they found were my erratic texts and a history of mental health treatment I never sought. They labeled me unstable, a danger to myself. I was alone. One morning, I woke to find the door to the basement unlocked. I never knew there was a basement. It wasn't on any blueprints I'd seen. Trembling, I descended the stairs into a cavernous space filled with dozens of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of my apartment, each stained with rust and dried blood. The air was thick with the smell of decay and old secrets. In the center, a circle of candles flickered despite no draft, casting long shadows that writhed like living things. I heard a voice, a low chant, words I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. The mirrors showed me versions of myself, some alive, some broken, some twisted beyond recognition. I realized then that the cleanup wasn't about erasing death, but preserving it, trapping it in a web of reflections and echoes that stretched across time and space. I was trapped in a living nightmare, a prisoner of a cycle I could neither escape nor fully understand. My apartment, the crime scenes, the company, they were all parts of a puzzle I couldn't solve, and the pieces were closing in around me. Now, I write this down as a warning for anyone who finds themselves drawn to these places, who cleans up the messes no one else wants to touch. Beware the scenes that look too familiar, the apartments that mirror your own. Because some places are cursed not by ghosts, but by something far worse, a reflection of yourself, broken and multiplied, waiting to pull you in and make you part of the endless cleanup. From that night onward, my life became a slow descent into madness, or perhaps awakening. I'm still not sure which. The faceless figure's words echoed endlessly in my mind. "You belong here now." At first, I thought it was some hallucination born of exhaustion and fear, but the more I tried to rationalize it, the more I realized I was trapped in a place where the rules of reality warped and bent. Every surface in my apartment seemed to pulse with a malevolent life. The wallpaper's peeling edges moved like slithering skin, curling inward to reveal layers of something dark and organic beneath. The furniture, once familiar, now felt like grotesque parodies of themselves. The couch sagged unnaturally, its fabric stretched tight like the skin of a corpse. The coffee table bore fresh scratches that hadn't been there before, patterns forming into cryptic symbols I couldn't read but that somehow felt deeply wrong. I would find objects moved, as if an invisible tenant shared the space with me, rearranging the room like a cruel puzzle I was meant to solve but never would. Sleep became a distant memory. Nightmares spilled over into my waking hours. Sometimes I would catch fleeting reflections in the window glass. Not my own, but a shadowy figure standing behind me, watching silently. Once, I found my breath visible in the air, though it was a warm summer evening. The air hung heavy, oppressive, as if the apartment was suffocating me, closing in tighter with each passing day. The most unsettling changes, though, were the smells and sounds. The coppery tang of blood seemed to linger in the corners of the rooms, faint and persistent. At times, I could swear I heard faint whispers echoing from the walls, words just beyond comprehension, like a forgotten language coaxing me to listen closer. On several occasions, the knocking returned, low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat or a countdown, emanating from the walls themselves. Each time I tried to follow it, the sounds would shift, leading me to different rooms or vanishing altogether, leaving me disoriented and panicked. Desperation drove me to seek help, but every attempt was met with cold indifference or outright suspicion. Friends pulled away, their faces strained with pity or unease. The police shrugged off my reports as stress-induced delusions, and my managers at work advised me to take time off, muttering about the psychological toll of the job. But no amount of rest eased the gnawing dread. If anything, the apartment's grip tightened. I started to notice the spirals everywhere, etched faintly into the wood grain on tables, embedded in the cracked plaster, carved subtly into the patterns of the carpet. I would trace them with shaking fingers, feeling the grooves deepen under my touch, as if alive. These spirals seemed to pulse with an energy that seeped into my bones, threading into my thoughts until I could no longer distinguish where I ended and the apartment began. Work became unbearable. Every new crime scene seemed more elaborate, more horrifying than the last, yet all carried echoes of the same spiral motif. Bloodstains arranged in swirling patterns, bodies positioned in grotesque reenactments of ancient rites. The cleanup crews whispered among themselves, exchanging fearful glances, refusing to discuss certain scenes or clients. Rumors circulated of a shadowy figure who haunted the company. Some called him the custodian, a man who appeared silently at certain scenes, overseeing the cleanup before vanishing without a trace. No one had seen his face, but those who crossed paths described a cold presence that chilled their souls. One night, after a particularly grueling job, I found a small, folded piece of paper tucked beneath the mattress of the victim's bed. Unfolding it with trembling hands, I saw a crudely drawn spiral with the words scrawled underneath. The cycle must continue. Resistance feeds the root. My heart pounded as I realized this was no random note. It was a message directed at me. The spiral motif wasn't just decoration. It was a symbol of something ancient and terrible, something that bound the victims, the apartments, and the company in a cycle of endless repetition and decay. The thought was suffocating. I realized then that my own apartment was no sanctuary. It was the next scene, the next stage in the cycle. I wasn't cleaning up these messes. I was part of them. The faceless figure's presence grew stronger. I began finding cryptic messages carved into the woodwork of my doors, written in dust on the windowsills, whispered through the vents. The apartment seemed to breathe, to watch, to wait. I could feel something moving beneath the floorboards, scratching, crawling, alive and hungry. Paranoia consumed me. I stopped leaving the apartment unless absolutely necessary. Even then, I felt the weight of unseen eyes following me. My coworkers avoided me now, their silence louder than words. My phone screen cracked one morning, though it had never been dropped, displaying a message in jagged letters. "You are the root. You cannot escape." I began to question my own memories, wondering if I had been living someone else's life, trapped in a looping nightmare crafted by the company and the sinister forces behind it. Then came the day I found the photograph tucked inside my coat pocket. A photo of myself, sleeping in my bed, taken from the shadows. The image was blurry, but the terror was clear. Whoever was watching was inside my apartment, closer than I dared imagine. There was no denying it anymore. The cleanup company was a front for something far darker, a cult or organization dedicated to perpetuating this horrific cycle of death and rebirth bound by the spiral symbol. The apartments, the victims, the spirals. They were all part of an endless loop that consumed lives and trapped souls in an eternal cleanup. Now, I am writing this down, hoping someone will read it and understand. If you ever find yourself cleaning a scene that looks too much like your own life, running through a place that mirrors your nightmares, heed this warning. The cleanup is not what it seems. It is a ritual, a trap, a sentence. And if you look too closely, if you see the spirals etched into the walls and feel the pull beneath your feet, you may find yourself next in the cycle, forever trapped in a nightmare where reality and madness are indistinguishable. and the only escape is to become part of the mess you were meant to erase. The days that followed were a waking nightmare I couldn't escape. My apartment had transformed into a living, breathing entity of dread, a monstrous reflection of the crime scene I'd cleaned, the one that looked like my home but wasn't. Every creak, every groan of the building sounded like the whispers of unseen watchers. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air growing thick with the coppery scent of old blood and decay. I tried to leave, packed bags, but the shadows clung to me like chains. My car wouldn't start, the elevators in the building ceased to function, and my phone battery drained inexplicably fast, cutting off any lifeline to the outside world. Desperation led me back to the company's files. Hidden in the depths of their records was something chilling, a detailed map of the city's crime scenes connected by spirals and symbols, forming a network that intersected exactly at my building. The company wasn't just cleaning up death. It was maintaining some grotesque ritual, feeding a dark cycle that spanned decades. I dug deeper, learning about Elias Crow, the company's founder, a man obsessed with death's permanence, who believed that death could be trapped, bottled like poison in places and objects, to be controlled and harvested. Employees whispered about his experiments, about people who disappeared without a trace after questioning the nature of their work. I was starting to question my own sanity, haunted by visions of those lost souls, their faces contorted in silent screams. At night, my dreams became vivid tableaus of past murders, ritualistic ceremonies, and shadowy figures chanting in rooms that looked just like mine. Sometimes, I would wake to find my skin crawling with dirt and grime, as if I had been part of those scenes I cleaned rather than just a witness. The faceless figure from the basement returned in my nightmares and waking moments alike, a constant reminder that I belonged to this nightmare now. One evening, I found a new symbol carved deep into the floor beneath my bed, a spiral surrounded by claw-like scratches, pulsing faintly with a sickly glow. I traced it with trembling fingers, feeling the cold seep into my bones. The room shifted, walls breathing, the floor tilting slightly. I heard a voice, low, guttural, and desperate, whisper, "Finish the cycle." I knew then that this was no longer just about cleaning. I was a participant in a ritual designed to trap souls, to preserve the endless spiral of violence and decay. My memories started to fragment. Moments of clarity were swallowed by confusion. I began losing track of time, of where I was and who I was. The spiral etched into the floor seemed to anchor me to this space, a tether I could neither sever nor escape. Friends had long since abandoned me, convinced I was losing my mind. The police ignored my frantic calls, labeling me a nuisance or worse. And the company, they watched silently from the shadows, their silence more terrifying than any accusation. One night, I dared to confront my manager, demanding answers about the cycle, the spirals, the deaths. He smiled, his eyes dark and hollow, and whispered, "We're all just part of the cleanup now. The only way out is through." That phrase echoed endlessly in my mind as I returned home, where the spiral beneath my bed glowed brighter, pulsing with a life of its own. The apartment no longer felt like a refuge. It was a tomb, a place where reality fractured, where I was both prisoner and prey. The walls whispered secrets I couldn't understand, but I felt their truth deep in my soul. The cycle was eternal, and I was ensnared at its center. As I write this now, I know my time is running out. The cleanup will come for me next, whether by my own hand or by forces beyond comprehension. The apartment and the spiral demand it. If you ever come across a scene that looks too much like your own life, a place where the shadows seem alive and the stains never fade, don't stay. Run. Because some cleanups aren't about wiping away the past. They're about feeding the darkness, perpetuating the nightmare, and pulling you into a spiral from which there is no escape. The more I tried to resist, the deeper the spiral pulled me in. Every waking moment was suffused with a growing sense of dread that consumed me like a slow poison. The apartment, the one I had once thought was my sanctuary, had become a cage with walls that breathed and whispered. It was no longer just a place. It was a living nightmare woven into the fabric of my existence. Every surface bore the marks of decay and madness. The wallpaper curled like rotting flesh, The floors creaked with unseen footsteps, and the stale air carried the faint, metallic scent of dried blood. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, stress, exhaustion, but the evidence was undeniable. I wasn't alone. The faceless shadow lingered just beyond my vision, a constant presence watching, waiting. Desperation drove me to record everything. I set up cameras in every room, hoping to catch some rational explanation for the strange phenomena. When I reviewed the footage, my blood ran cold. Shadows twisted into impossible shapes. Reflections showed rooms where none existed. Whispers in the darkness coalesced into voices calling my name. One night, the recordings captured something far worse. A figure, tall and faceless, moving silently through the apartment. It stopped in front of the camera and tilted its head, as if studying me. Then it vanished. The creeping spiral was everywhere now, etched deeply into my skin during the night, a tattoo that pulsed with cold energy. It was as though the apartment was branding me, marking me as part of its twisted cycle. I reached out to former employees of the cleanup company, hoping to find answers. Some had quit, others had vanished. One woman, a former supervisor, responded to my messages with a warning. They're not just cleaning stains, they're capturing souls. The spiral is a prison, and you're already inside. She told me about Elias Crow's secret research into binding human essence to physical locations, creating eternal prisons of torment. The company's real mission was to perpetuate this ritual, keeping the cycle alive. The victims weren't just dead. They were trapped, forced to relive their final moments as the apartments slowly consumed them. I became obsessed, poring over every detail of the company's past. Every news story of disappearances linked to their jobs. Each case was eerily similar. Apartments mirroring the victims' own homes, spirals carved into walls, the same faceless figure reported as seen moments before the cleanups. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a key and a lock, binding victims to their torment. I feared that I was next. The apartment seemed to feed off my terror, growing stronger as I weakened. I found my reflection distorted in every mirror. Eyes sunken, skin pale and cracked like dried clay. Sometimes, I would catch glimpses of the faceless figure behind me, only for it to vanish when I turned. My dreams were no refuge. They were portals to the nightmare beneath my reality. Visions of ceremonies drenched in blood, chanting voices, and endless cycles of death and rebirth. Then came the moment I could no longer deny the truth. I was trapped. The apartment was no longer just a place, it was a prison, and I was its newest inmate. I felt the spiral beneath my feet pulsing in rhythm with my heart. The walls closing in, the shadows reaching out with grasping fingers. I wanted to escape, to break the cycle, but every door was a dead end, every window a mirror reflecting my torment. Now, as I write this, I realize the spiral's grip is tightening. The cleanup isn't over. My story is just another layer in the endless cycle of violence and erasure. If you ever find yourself in a scene that feels too familiar, if the shadows seem to watch and the stains refuse to fade, run. Don't look back, because some cleanups are eternal, and once you're part of the spiral, there's no way out. I don't know how much longer I have before the cycle claims me completely. The apartment, the cleanup company, the spirals, they're all a prison, and I'm its newest prisoner. The walls whisper secrets I can't forget, and the shadows press closer every day. I've stopped trying to fight it. Resistance only makes the spiral tighten, the darkness grow. I've accepted that this nightmare is my reality now, that my reflection is forever fractured in those blood-stained mirrors, that the faceless figure waits patiently for me to surrender. I write this as a warning and a confession because maybe, if someone finds this, they can avoid the fate I couldn't escape. If you ever find yourself cleaning a scene that looks too much like your own life, if the stains refuse to come clean, if you feel eyes watching from every corner, run. Don't linger. Don't try to understand. Some places aren't just haunted. They're alive, and they want you to become part of their endless cleanup. Because in this cycle, death is not the end. It's just the beginning of a nightmare that repeats forever. And the only way out is to become part of the mess. I'm writing these words with trembling hands, hoping to leave a trace, a sign that I was here, that I fought even when it seemed hopeless. But the truth is, the spiral is closing in. Soon, my story will be just another echo in the endless cycle of blood and shadows, and someone else will take my place. If you read this, beware the cleanup. Beware the spiral, because once you see it, you belong to it forever. Story 3. I never thought something like this would happen in my town. It's the kind of place people forget even exists. A sleepy little dot on the map with quiet streets, a few mom and pop shops, and that overwhelming feeling that nothing ever really changes. But beneath its mundane surface lurked something dark, something that most of us tried to ignore: the serial killer. For years, whispers circulated about a shadowy figure responsible for the disappearances, the strange deaths, the chilling notes left at crime scenes. No one ever caught him, though, and the police files slowly grew cold. Then came the podcast, Dark Trails, hosted by a local journalist named Mark Hastings. Mark wasn't from here originally, but he'd moved in a few years back and immediately took an interest in the unsolved cases. His voice was calm, but his words cut deep as he meticulously documented the timeline, the victims, the theories, and most disturbingly, the police's consistent missteps and silence. His episodes struck a nerve, stirring unease in a town that preferred to forget the horrors lurking in its shadows. I started listening casually, drawn in by his meticulous research and the eerie way he pieced together fragmented clues. But as I binged episode after episode, I noticed something chilling. Mark wasn't just reporting. He was investigating in real time. He visited crime scenes, interviewed people who'd never spoken publicly, and even hinted that the killer might be closer than we thought. Then, one episode dropped that set my blood running cold. Mark claimed to have uncovered a secret network of surveillance footage, private logs, and coded messages that pointed to the killer's identity. His voice trembled as he described confronting a person of interest, someone deeply embedded in the community, someone trusted. I listened to the episode late at night, heart hammering, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. And it did. Days after the episode aired, Mark vanished. No notes, no calls, no trace. His social media accounts went silent, his phone straight to voicemail. The podcast stopped abruptly, leaving listeners with a cliffhanger that was no longer just a story but a real-life mystery. The town went into lockdown. Police swept the streets, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and fear gnawed at the edges of daily life. I was obsessed. I knew Mark personally, or at least I thought I did. We'd crossed paths a few times at town meetings, coffee shops, even that dive bar on Main Street. He was always friendly but guarded, as if carrying the weight of the town's dark secrets on his shoulders. After his disappearance, I started digging through everything he'd left behind: his recordings, his notes, his emails. I pieced together fragments of conversations that hinted at threats, surveillance, and a growing paranoia that someone was watching him, tracking his movements. One chilling email, sent just hours before he vanished, read, "They know I'm close. If I disappear, keep looking." That phrase haunted me, as did the half-finished transcripts on his laptop. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the killer wasn't just a myth or a cold case, but an active predator hiding in plain sight, using fear and silence to protect his secrets. My own world began to unravel as strange things happened. Late-night knocks at my door, shadowy figures glimpsed in passing headlights, anonymous calls filled with static and faint whispers. Friends started avoiding me, warning me to stay out of it, to let sleeping monsters lie. But I couldn't. Mark's voice echoed in my mind, urging me to dig deeper. So I did. I started retracing his steps, visiting the locations he'd recorded, speaking with people he'd interviewed, following the breadcrumbs left in his podcasts. What I found was a labyrinth of deception, lies, and chilling truths about the town I'd called home all my life. And I realized one terrifying fact: the story wasn't over. It was just beginning, because whoever silenced Mark was still out there, watching, waiting, and now they had their eyes on me. The days after Mark's disappearance were the darkest I've ever known. The town, once sleepy and indifferent, suddenly seemed suffocated by a thick blanket of fear and suspicion. The local news barely touched on it, Just dry updates about missing persons reports and vague statements from police urging calm. But behind closed doors, everyone was talking in hushed tones, glancing over their shoulders, locking doors twice and triple-checking windows. I became consumed by the need to find Mark or at least uncover what had happened to him. I knew that if I didn't act, his fate might be sealed forever, lost to whatever dark force had swallowed him whole. Using what I'd gleaned from his episodes and notes, I started tracing his investigation thread by thread. Mark's last known location was an old abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of town, a place he said held clues no one dared explore. The mill was a hulking relic, its broken windows and rusted machinery standing as a testament to the town's faded glory and forgotten past. Locals avoided it, whispering about strange noises and shadows moving behind the crumbling walls. One night, armed with a flashlight and a camera, I made my way there. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, the scent of mildew and rust filling my lungs. I followed the path Mark had taken, noting the graffiti scrawled on the walls, some of it random, some eerily specific. Spirals, cryptic symbols, and a name repeated in faded red paint, Elias. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt the hairs on my neck stand on end. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water and the echo of my footsteps. Then I found it. A room hidden behind a false wall, accessible only by crawling through a narrow gap. Inside was a trove of evidence Mark had gathered, photographs, maps, recordings, and notes pinned to a makeshift corkboard. His handwriting was frantic, filled with crossed-out lines and urgent annotations. One photo showed a shadowy figure standing outside a window, face obscured, watching. Another was of a hastily sketched map marking locations across town, linked by lines and symbols matching the graffiti outside. I pocketed a small recorder Mark had left behind, hoping to capture anything that might shed light on his last moments. As I examined the evidence, a sudden noise behind me made me spin around. A sharp metallic clang echoed through the empty mill. I froze, heart pounding, straining to hear any other sounds. Nothing. When I turned back, I noticed that some of the notes on the board had been rearranged, as if someone or something had been there recently. My skin prickled with dread. I snapped photos and hurried out of the mill, the oppressive silence chasing me back into the night. Back at home, I began piecing together what Mark had uncovered. The name Elias kept coming up, not just in graffiti, but in old news articles and whispered rumors. Elias Crow was the town's original serial killer, arrested decades ago for a string of murders that had left a scar on the community. But there were theories that Crow never worked alone, that he was part of a sinister network protecting others like him. Mark's recordings hinted at the existence of this network, a secret cabal operating in the shadows, manipulating events and silencing anyone who got too close. Then, a message arrived. An unmarked envelope slid under my door containing a USB drive and a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They watch. Trust no one. Find me." The drive contained audio files, fragments of phone calls, surveillance footage, and a chilling recording of Mark speaking in a whisper, warning that the network was closing ranks and that his time was running out. My investigation was no longer a curiosity or obsession. It was a race for survival. Whoever wanted Mark gone now had their sights set on me. And in the darkest corners of this town, the truth was a weapon and a curse. From the moment I plugged that USB drive into my laptop, my life spiraled into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The files revealed so much. Fragments of conversations, cryptic whispers, and surveillance footage so grainy and unsettling I almost didn't dare watch it. But I did. Mark's voice was everywhere, layered with urgency and fear. In one recording, he spoke of a meeting, an underground gathering of people tied to the dark network he'd uncovered. He mentioned code names, locations, and hinted at a ritualistic pattern to the killings, something that bound the victims and the killers in a twisted, unholy cycle. The footage showed blurred faces exchanging documents and whispering in languages I couldn't understand. I felt like I was peering into a hidden underworld, one that thrived in the shadows of my town. That same night, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Anonymous texts flooded in, warnings to stop digging, veiled threats cloaked in friendly tones, cryptic images of spirals and broken clocks. It felt like the town itself was conspiring to silence me. Despite the fear, I couldn't stop. I reached out to people Mark had mentioned in his podcast. Former cops who'd been pressured to drop cases, survivors who'd lost loved ones, witnesses too scared to speak. Some responded cautiously, sharing fragments of stories and rumors. Others disappeared. One contact, a woman named Evelyn, agreed to meet me in a secluded cafe. She was shaken, eyes darting nervously as she spoke about a secret society within the town. A group of powerful individuals shielding the killers and maintaining a facade of normalcy. She told me that Mark had been close to exposing them, that his investigations had rattled their cage. "They don't just kill to hide secrets," she whispered. "They kill because it's part of something bigger, a ritual, a sacrifice to keep the darkness at bay, or maybe to feed it." Her words sent chills down my spine. That night, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but the place was ransacked. Papers torn, drawers emptied, the spiral symbol carved deep into the wooden floor. I found a note left on my desk: "Stop before it's too late." But it was too late. I was in too deep. I began piecing together a timeline of disappearances and deaths going back decades, all linked by a web of secret meetings, coded messages, and bizarre symbols matching those Mark had recorded. The pattern was undeniable. A spiral of violence and silence that spun faster with every victim. I dug into Elias Crow's past more obsessively than ever, learning about his supposed capture and trial, but also about inconsistencies. Witnesses who'd recanted, evidence that had mysteriously vanished, rumors of a second, unseen figure who might have been the true mastermind behind the killings. As I delved deeper, strange phenomena began haunting me. My reflection would warp in mirrors. Shadows shifted unnaturally at the edges of my vision. I'd hear footsteps pacing outside my door, only to find the hallway empty. Sleep was fractured by nightmares of faceless figures, whispered chants, and a darkness that seemed to stretch infinitely. I kept hearing a voice in my dreams, soft, coaxing, promising knowledge but warning of a terrible price. Then, one night, the power cut out. The silence was absolute, broken only by a slow, deliberate knocking at my window. Frozen, I peered into the darkness, but saw nothing. The knocking continued, rhythmic, insistent. I couldn't move until the first light of dawn broke, after which the knocking ceased abruptly. The next morning, a package awaited me on my doorstep. Inside was a weathered journal Mark's. Its pages were filled with frantic scrawls, sketches of spirals and faces, coded messages, and disturbing entries about a watcher who had been stalking him. The last entry was a chilling warning. "They are everywhere. Trust no one. The spiral never ends." I realized that the podcast was more than a story. It was a cry for help, a map through a labyrinth of horrors that the town refused to acknowledge. I'm writing this now because I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Whoever silenced Mark is still out there, pulling strings, erasing truths, and watching. And with every word I write, I feel their gaze turn toward me. This is no longer just an investigation. It's a fight to survive the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of this town. A darkness bound by secrets, lies, and the unending spiral of violence. If you find this, if you hear Mark's voice echoing in the static, know that the nightmare is real. The spiral never ends. And sometimes, the ones who seek the truth become the next victim in the story they tried to tell. After reading through Mark's journal late into the night, I realized the depth of the darkness I'd stepped into. His words weren't just notes. They were a roadmap of terror, a desperate attempt to piece together a puzzle so monstrous that the town's collective silence made sense only in hindsight. The watcher he described wasn't just a metaphor. It was an entity, a presence that stalked him relentlessly, an unseen eye that saw every step he took, every secret he uncovered. The spiral symbol recurred endlessly, etched into walls, scrawled on paper, even branded onto flesh in some of the case files Mark had uncovered. It was a sigil of power, of control, binding victims and perpetrators in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. As I pored over the journal, I found detailed accounts of Mark's encounters with people who vanished soon after speaking to him, cryptic phone calls where the line would go dead as soon as he mentioned certain names, and his growing paranoia as he sensed he was being hunted. I became obsessed with tracking down those names. Local figures shadowed by whispers of corruption and violence. One name kept surfacing: Samuel Grayson, a wealthy philanthropist with a spotless public image but a history buried deep beneath layers of bribery, intimidation, and suspected ties to the town's darkest crimes. My attempts to approach Grayson were met with cold smiles and guarded responses, but my questions didn't go unnoticed. Soon, I noticed a black sedan parked outside my building for days on end, its tinted windows reflecting my every move. Strangers began to appear in my peripheral vision, vanishing when I turned. My phone buzzed with cryptic messages. The spiral tightens, don't follow the trail, and the most chilling of all, you're next. Desperation forced me to reach out to the police, but the response was dismissive, even hostile. Officers I'd known for years avoided eye contact, gave vague answers, and warned me to let it go. It was clear that the network Mark had exposed was far-reaching, corrupting institutions I'd trusted. One evening, a knock shattered the silence. At the door stood Evelyn, the woman who'd first warned me about the secret society. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. She handed me a small, battered key and whispered, "This opens the last place Mark went, the place where he vanished." Without waiting for a response, she disappeared into the night. The key was old, ornate, and cold in my hand. It belonged to the town's old library, a forgotten building rumored to house archives no one dared explore. Inside, I found a hidden basement filled with files, photographs, and tapes. Evidence that Mark had collected but never revealed publicly. Among them was a video recording of a clandestine meeting between Grayson and several masked figures, discussing plans to maintain the order and purity of the town by eliminating threats. People like Mark. The video ended abruptly with a chilling laugh, the camera shaking as if someone had rushed to stop the recording. Suddenly, I understood the magnitude of what I was facing. A conspiracy so vast it infiltrated every corner of the community. A cycle of violence and silence maintained through fear and power. The spiral was their symbol, their ritual, their control mechanism. As I prepared to leave the library, I felt the weight of unseen eyes. Shadows danced in the corners, whispering threats and promises of doom. The spiral was no longer just a symbol on paper. It was a living curse, a binding force that threatened to consume anyone who dared to break the silence. I knew I was running out of time. The story Mark began was mine now to finish, or to become the next forgotten victim swallowed by the endless spiral. The weight of everything I had uncovered pressed down on me like a suffocating fog, yet I couldn't turn back. Not now, not after coming this far. The spiral's grip was tightening, and every step forward plunged me deeper into a shadowed world where trust was a myth and betrayal lurked behind every smile. After leaving the library, I found myself haunted not just by what I'd seen, but by the absence of answers. Mark's disappearance was no accident. It was a calculated erasure, part of the network's unyielding campaign to protect itself. I started documenting everything. The people I spoke to, the threats I received, the eerie signs that someone or something was watching my every move. But with each revelation came a growing sense of isolation. Friends and family recoiled, fearing association would draw them into the nightmare. Strangers became hostile, and I caught glimpses of shadowy figures trailing me through the streets, vanishing just when I tried to confront them. Sleep became a battleground. Nightmares of spirals twisting endlessly, faceless figures looming, and voices whispering my name invaded my mind. At times, I woke to find cryptic symbols drawn in condensation on my windows or strange marks etched into the woodwork of my apartment. I realized the spiral was no longer just a symbol in the past. It was here, now, marking me as part of the cycle. Desperation drove me back to Evelyn. Her warnings were grave, her eyes haunted. She confessed that Mark had been close to uncovering a ritual tied to the spiral, a dark ceremony that bound the network's members in a blood oath, ensuring silence and obedience. The ritual was said to grant power over life and death within the town, but at a terrible cost. We devised a plan to infiltrate a gathering Mark had hinted at in his recordings, a clandestine meeting where the network renewed its dark pact. Using the contacts and clues Mark had left, we found our way to an abandoned chapel deep in the woods, a place long forgotten and overgrown. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay as we approached, shadows flickering in the torchlight held by robed figures circling an altar inscribed with spirals. Chanting filled the air, a low, hypnotic drone that reverberated through my bones. Faces hidden behind masks watched silently as the ceremony unfolded, a macabre dance of power and fear. At the center, a figure stood, a man whose presence radiated cold authority, whose eyes seemed to pierce through the darkness. I recognized him immediately: Samuel Grayson. The ritual culminated in a chilling sacrifice, a symbolic act meant to bind the participants ever tighter to the spiral's curse. My heart pounded as I realized the depth of depravity underpinning the town's facade. I fumbled with my phone, capturing what I could before the sudden rush of figures, and a blinding pain to my head sent me spiraling into unconsciousness. When I awoke, I was alone, the forest silent save for the distant howl of a wolf. My phone was gone, and my clothes were torn. The spiral was seared into my mind, a brand I couldn't escape. I had seen the heart of the darkness, and now it hunted me. Back in town, I discovered a disturbing truth. My investigation had been tracked, monitored. Surveillance footage showed me entering the chapel, but no footage showed me leaving. Rumors spread that I'd gone missing, just like Mark. I knew the network was erasing my existence from the world, rewriting reality to maintain their grip. But I refused to vanish quietly. I'm recording this now, in the hope that someone, somewhere, will find the truth and break the spiral. The network's power is vast, its reach nearly unstoppable. But exposure is the only weapon I have left. If you hear this, if you feel the pull of the spiral in your own life, run. Don't stop, because once the spiral tightens around you, escape is nearly impossible, and the darkness never forgets. The days following that night in the woods became a blur of paranoia, dread, and a gnawing sense of impending doom. I was no longer simply chasing a story. I had become the hunted, a prey ensnared in a web spun by a powerful unseen force. Every glance over my shoulder, every unexpected noise sent my heart racing. The spiral's presence wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was tangible, seeping into every corner of my life like a poison. I started noticing it everywhere. The flicker of lights forming swirling patterns, graffiti hidden beneath layers of paint, even the way shadows pooled in my apartment corners, curling into shapes that resembled that cursed spiral. My phone buzzed endlessly with anonymous texts, some begging me to stop, others promising vengeance if I continued. Sleep was a stranger. When I did manage to rest, nightmares gripped me. Visions of faceless figures dragging me down spiraling tunnels, walls closing in, voices chanting in a language that felt ancient and terrible. The spiral wasn't just a symbol of the network's power. It was a prison, a binding spell designed to trap souls in silence descent forever. I realized that Mark, Evelyn, and I were part of a long chain of victims and seekers, caught in a cycle that stretched back decades. Each who tried to expose the truth vanished, their stories erased, their lives folded into the spiral's endless turn. My days were spent poring over Mark's final recordings, his frantic notes, trying to decode the secrets of the spiral and the network. There was a pattern, a ritual cycle linked to the town's history, tied to old folklore about sacrifices made to keep a darkness at bay, a curse that demanded blood and silence. The network wasn't just a group of killers. It was a cult, a shadow government feeding on fear and death to maintain control. One evening, a knock shattered the oppressive silence of my apartment. I opened the door cautiously to find a small, battered box sitting on the threshold. Inside was a leather-bound journal, Mark's last gift. I realized it contained confessions, revelations, and detailed descriptions of the network's rituals, the spiral's true meaning, and a desperate plea for whoever found it to continue the fight. As I read, a message became clear. The spiral was a trap, but also a key. If understood, it could be broken, the cycle ended. but the cost would be unimaginable. The final pages described a ritual Mark had planned, a confrontation with the network's leader, Samuel Grayson himself. He believed that exposing the ritual during its darkest hour could shatter the spiral's hold and free the town from its curse. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to face the darkness directly, to enter the lion's den and risk everything. I prepared for what might be my last stand, gathering evidence, arming myself with whatever I could find, and steeling my nerves for the confrontation to come. But as I stepped out into the cold night, I knew that the spiral was already tightening around me. The faceless watchers were closing in, the network's reach stretching into every shadow. This was no longer just a story of a missing podcaster or a forgotten serial killer. It was a battle for my very soul and the fate of the town itself. I write this now as a warning and a plea. If you hear the whisper of the spiral, if you feel the weight of unseen eyes, run. Don't try to unravel the darkness alone. Because once the spiral binds you, escape becomes a fading dream, and the cycle begins anew. The following weeks blurred into a restless haze where paranoia and purpose collided in an unbearable tension. Every phone call was a threat. Every stranger's gaze felt like a knife slicing through my resolve. I had become the target of something monstrous, a hidden force that had swallowed Mark and countless others before me. I lived on the edge of panic, my apartment turning into a fortress of locked doors, drawn curtains, and surveillance cameras pointed at every entrance. Yet, no matter how tightly I clutched my fragile grip on normalcy, the spiral tightened relentlessly around me. One night, a storm raged outside as if mirroring the tempest inside my mind. Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating the spiral symbol etched into the floorboards. Something I had discovered carved beneath the rug, its edges worn but unmistakable. It pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light, as if alive. I had no idea how it got there or what dark purpose it served, but I knew instinctively it was connected to the network's curse. My research led me deeper into the town's shadowed past. Archives revealed twisted histories, families bound by blood and silence, generations marked by unexplained disappearances, and a secret society that had thrived under the guise of civic duty and philanthropy. The spiral was their emblem, their binding oath, and their warning to anyone who dared to pry. One evening, a late-night call came from an unknown number. A voice whispered, "The spiral remembers. It sees. It waits." Then the line went dead. The terror was no longer just physical. It was psychological, invading every moment, every thought. Sleep was impossible without vivid nightmares of endless tunnels lined with spirals, faceless figures chanting and beckoning me to join the cycle. I had to know the truth no matter the cost. Using Mark's journal, I pieced together a plan, a final confrontation at the upcoming ritual, to expose the network once and for all. I contacted Evelyn one last time, and together we prepared to infiltrate the ceremony, armed with cameras and evidence. The night was cold and suffocating as we approached the dilapidated chapel once more. This time, however, we were ready. Inside, the air was thick with incense and menace. The robed figures gathered in a circle around the altar, their faces hidden behind ornate masks. Grayson stood at the center, his gaze cold and unyielding. The chanting began, low and rhythmic, vibrating through my bones. The spiral symbol was carved deep into the altar, glowing faintly in the flickering candlelight. Evelyn and I hid behind a column, filming everything, hearts pounding in sync with the ritual's dark cadence. Suddenly, Grayson's voice rang out, proclaiming the eternal power of the spiral and the necessity of sacrifice to maintain the town's fragile peace. Then, the unthinkable, a struggle erupted. Members of the network lunged towards us, faces twisting with rage and desperation. In the chaos, Evelyn was dragged away, her screams cut short by the crushing silence that followed. I was left alone, heart hammering, chased into the woods by shadows that whispered my name. I ran until I could no longer hear their pursuit, collapsing beneath a twisted tree as dawn painted the sky with pale light. I am writing this from a hiding place unknown to the network, unsure if I will live to see another day. But one thing is clear: the spiral's curse endures, binding this town in an endless cycle of darkness, death, and silence. Mark's voice echoes in my mind, a ghostly guide urging me to continue the fight, to expose the truth even if it costs me everything. If you find this story, know that the horror is real. The spiral is more than a symbol. It is a prison, a curse, and a warning. And once you are caught in its infinite loop, there may be no escape. The night I narrowly escaped that chapel ritual, I felt the crushing weight of defeat, but also a burning resolve that refused to be extinguished. The network's reach was vast, their power nearly omnipotent within the town's shadowed veins. I'd lost Evelyn to them, and perhaps soon I'd be next. Yet the truth demanded to be uncovered, the spiral's secrets exposed. I spent the following days in hiding, piecing together every scrap of evidence Mark and Evelyn had collected, and every clue I'd uncovered on my own. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a sigil of ancient origin, tied to dark rites designed to bind souls and seal fates. The town was a crucible where this horrific cycle repeated endlessly, generations caught in its web, sacrificed to maintain the order beneath the surface. But the deeper I delved, the more I realized something chilling. The spiral was alive. It was an entity, feeding on fear, feeding on silence. It was the force animating the network, the power behind the killings, the unseen presence stalking the streets. I started seeing it everywhere, in graffiti, in the curling patterns of shadows, in dreams that bled into waking life. And always, the whisper, the spiral remembers. Desperation drove me to seek out an unlikely ally, Father Michael, the town's aging priest who had quietly opposed the network for decades. He revealed cryptic histories buried in church archives, how the spiral was once a protective symbol, twisted over centuries by dark influences into a curse binding the town's fate. He spoke of an ancient ritual that could sever the spiral's hold, but warned it required a sacrifice unlike any other. Someone willing to become the spiral's vessel, to take on its curse and break the cycle from within. I realized Mark had been preparing for this, and perhaps now it was my turn. Armed with this grim knowledge, I returned to the mill, the site of countless horrors and the place where the network's power had first been anchored. There, beneath the ruins, I found a hidden chamber where the spiral was carved deep into stone, glowing faintly with an eerie light. As I approached, the air thickened, and the faces of past victims flickered in the shadows, their silent screams filling the chamber. I could feel the spiral's hunger, its desperate need to bind me, consume me, make me part of its endless loop. But I was determined. I began the ritual described in Father Michael's notes, chanting incantations, drawing symbols, offering a piece of my soul in exchange for the town's freedom. The ground trembled beneath me, and a cold wind whipped through the chamber as the spiral's light pulsed wildly. For a moment, I was consumed by darkness, caught in the endless spinning of the spiral itself. Then, a flash of blinding white and silence. When I opened my eyes, I was outside the mill, dawn breaking over the horizon. The spiral was gone. At least that's what I told myself. But deep inside, I knew the truth. I was forever changed. The spiral's curse had not vanished. It had found a new host. I felt its pulse within me, a quiet, constant reminder of the sacrifice made. I was free to walk the town's streets, to live again, but I carried the spiral's weight, its endless hunger. I write this not as a victory, but a warning. The spiral cycle may have been broken, but only by binding itself to another soul. The darkness in this town never truly dies. It waits, it watches, and one day the spiral will spin again. If you hear the whisper of the spiral, beware. The fight is never truly over, because sometimes the price of truth is to become the very nightmare you sought to end. I wish I could say that after that night, the nightmare ended, that the spiral's grip finally loosened and the town breathed freely again. But the truth is far darker, more twisted. The spiral never truly left. It doesn't leave. It's a curse that burrows deep inside you, reshaping your soul in ways you can't see but feel every second of every day. Since that dawn outside the mill, life has gone on. People laugh, children play, and the town seems normal on the surface. But I know better. The spiral's pulse beats within me, a quiet torment that never fades. I sometimes catch myself tracing the shape in my mind, involuntarily drawing its endless curves on every blank surface. My dreams are haunted by the faces of those who came before, Mark and Evelyn among them, their eyes pleading for release I cannot give. The faceless watchers never truly disappear either. They linger at the edge of vision, whispering secrets that twist like knives in my brain. I live in constant fear that one day, the network will come for me, or worse, that I'll lose control and become the spiral's vessel for destruction. The townsfolk continue their quiet lives, unaware or unwilling to confront the darkness they harbor. The missing, the silenced, they are woven into the fabric of this place, trapped in the endless spiral that spins beneath their feet. Sometimes I wonder if anyone will ever break free, or if the spiral is eternal, an ancient hunger that consumes everything, binding victims and perpetrators alike in a cursed dance of death and silence. I am writing this as a warning, a plea, and a confession. If you hear the tale of the podcast host who vanished, know that the truth lies buried beneath layers of fear and blood. The spiral is real, the network is real, and the darkness never forgets. If you find yourself drawn to uncover secrets in forgotten places, beware the spiral's call, because sometimes seeking the truth is the most dangerous thing you can do, and the spiral's embrace is a fate worse than death. This story may be my last, or merely the beginning of a new cycle. Either way, I am forever changed. I walk the line between hunter and hunted, truth and madness, freedom and curse. And in the silence of the night, when the world sleeps, I can still hear the spiral whispering my name.